Chapter 973. This is Burnell. Yes, you can pretend to be lame. I know, but his body, where did the fat go? Hee hee. Wu Ding smiled and shook his head. I was a little puzzled just now. Why didn't I sense any mages around? But there was a faint wave of dark magic in the attic. Well, it should be some kind of evil magic tool that can absorb blood essence. That's how it can make people thin in a very short period of time. Hee hee. In order to escape, this Burnell is also going all out. Winston was speechless. On the one hand, he secretly admired Burnell's ingenious escape plan. On the other hand, he was also moved by his ruthless decisiveness. One must know that evil magic tools were not good things. It was possible to use it to achieve the purpose of losing weight, but at the same time, in addition to the fat, there was also the precious lifespan. It had to be said that this was really going all out, so much so that Winston was worried. Can Tang Yin still catch up? This was indeed a problem. Wu Ding's perception had been on Burnell's body, so he noticed something was wrong at the first moment. But it was hard to say whether Tang Yin, who only relied on the naked eye to observe, could see through this scene. If he was defeated, then Wu Ding, who was following Burnell, would be meaningless. It should be possible. Wu Ding thought about it and chose to believe in Tang Yin, but then he added, if not, then this bet is his loss. Tang Yin and Wu Ding, with the current strength of the two, although this gambling duel was not unprecedented, it was definitely rare. Who would have thought that the outcome of this duel would be decided by a nobody? It was truly a helpless and absurd thing. However, Wu Ding could accept such a result. After all, they won anyway. They could also have some initiative in the next conversation with Tang Yin. So seriously speaking, Wu Ding and the others should be grateful to Burnell. However, before Wu Ding could finish the word lose from his mouth, all of a sudden, boom, there was a violent explosion, and flames soared into the sky. The carriage driven by Burnell suddenly turned into a raging fireball on the deserted street in front of Wu Ding and Roland's eyes. It exploded, sending wood splinters everywhere. Immediately after, waves of heat waves and smoke rose rapidly from below, enveloping Wu Ding and Wensilin, who were in a daze high in the sky. Faintly, screams of terror came from the surrounding residential areas. Many doors and windows were opened, and the sparse lights suddenly lit up like stars. This was a peaceful capital city, not a border city on the northern front lines where the flames of war raged all over the sky. Therefore, the citizens did not have much sense of danger when they encountered such a sudden change. Instead, they were more curious about what was going on. Exploding crystal? In terms of effect and power, the effects of some alchemy and magic tools were very similar to the attacks of mages and warriors. However, in the eyes of an expert with rich combat experience, they could still see the subtle differences. Coming back to his senses, Wensilin quickly identified the cause of the violent explosion below and turned to look at Wu Ding in a daze. Wu Ding was frowning in deep thought. In the smoke, Chen Ning's expression was somewhat unpleasant. Under the power of such an explosion, Burnell was undoubtedly dead. Of course, this was not the main point. The main point was, why did the carriage suddenly explode? When did someone put an exploding crystal on it? Just as Wensilin had known before, Wu Ding's perception had indeed been on Burnell's body, and he had not relaxed for a moment. Moreover, because Burnell's strength was too low, Wu Ding, who did not have the slightest burden, completely used him as a mobile carrier and spread his perception to the surroundings. It was not an exaggeration to say that the current Wu Ding knew himself even better than Burnell himself, including every trace of his fear, every tremble of his body, and so on. He could feel them all clearly. In this situation, as long as there was any problem with his body, any movement in the surroundings, Wu Ding would be able to sense it at the first moment and kill him in an instant. But now his perception was clearly very stable a moment ago, and he did not feel any abnormalities at all. But in the next moment, someone inexplicably pressed an exploding crystal, and he suddenly turned into ashes. No, there must be a problem with that link. It's just that I didn't notice suddenly. Wu Ding's expression froze, and his long robe fluttered without wind. The pressure he unintentionally released was like an unsheathed sharp sword, instantly slashing apart the surrounding heat waves and smoke, and retreating in a roundabout way. Master, when Scylla, who was the closest, bore the brunt of the impact. Caught off guard, he was immediately sent flying dozens of feet away and hurriedly retreated in a sorry state. Let's go. In a flash, Wu Ding grabbed Wen Scylla's shoulder with one hand and opened the way with the simple and unadorned long sword, rushing back in the direction they came from. It was said before that if everything else was put aside, just based on physical strength alone, Tang Yin's speed was almost unmatched, and Wu Ding was no exception. But this did not mean that Wu Ding's speed was completely inadequate. He had his own way of hurrying, and that was to move with the sword, and the speed of the sword was the speed of the body. In a breath's time, the two of them had already returned to the sky above Burnell's loft and continued to move forward, diving down and heading straight for the street corner not far away. Landing on the ground, he turned around, and his line of sight fell on a familiar carriage parked on the side of another street. Wu Ding shook his head, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. As expected, old. It seems that I really am old. This is the carriage of Burnell's substitute? Following Wu Ding's line of sight, Wen Scylla was suddenly stunned. They were indeed familiar with this carriage. It was the one that Burnell had driven back from the shop, and then let the substitute drive it away. Startled, he realized something and cried out involuntarily, "That substitute is a fake, no. That substitute is Tang Yin?" This guess was well-founded, because from the beginning to the end, the only one who had approached Burnell's carriage under their eyes was this substitute. Nodding with a bitter smile, Wu Ding looked up to the sky and sighed, little Tang. Good thinking, good calculation, good guts. Losing is not an injustice." His guess was confirmed, but Wen Scylla was not happy, and his face was wooden, because losing was indeed not an injustice. With the cause leading to the cause, there was no mystery to everything. Obviously, when he knew that Burnell might have betrayed him, Tang inside began to investigate and found out that Burnell had prepared an escape route for himself. The substitute with an extremely similar figure. What happened after that was natural, and Tang replaced the substitute with a flawless disguise. Burnell, who was unaware, saw that his betrayal was exposed and hurried back. He did not find out that there was a problem with the substitute, and it was impossible for him to find out. Because time was tight, Burnell must have been thinking about how to carry out an escape plan and avoid Tang Yin's pursuit. Then, it was the scene where they went out. Because Wu Ding's perception had always been on Burnell. When he saw the two of them come out, he saw through the trick at the first moment, and his attention was still on the real Burnell. He did not really look at the substitute, which was Tang Yin, and smoothly let Tang Yin place an explosive device on Burnell's carriage under their eyes. Then, according to the script, he finished the rest of the play, threw down the money, and calmly drove away. The bet was over, and the winner was decided. It was dark under the light. It could be said that what led this showdown was not a fierce competition of strength and martial arts, nor was it Burnell's dying struggle, but an unconscious error in thinking. But it was such a small and almost negligible error in thinking that made Tang Yin, who had succeeded, pass by Wu Ding and sigh helplessly, thinking about how he still foolishly took Winston and continued to follow Burnell's carriage that had been placed with an explosive device. Even Wu Ding, who had experienced countless storms, could not help but feel his old face slightly hot. He thought that he was a mantis hiding in the sky and was foolproof, but he never thought that there was an Oriole hiding below who controlled the overall situation. It was really a clumsy scene. Master, looking at Wu Ding's gloomy expression, Winston opened his mouth and wanted to say something to comfort him. Waving his hand, Wu Ding's expression returned to calmness. It was just a small setback, and he was not so fragile. He reached out and pointed at the carriage. "Go take a look. Lil Tang should have left something." Tang did leave something, and it was still a note with only a few words and a strange smiley face. "Old Wu, you let me win. Carrot dash carrot." Chapter 974. Under normal circumstances, after testing the waters and other probing actions, the next step would be an open battle. However, there were occasional accidents, such as the current situation in the capital. After the winner of the bet, called the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind that night, Wu Ding simply brought Winston back to the mountain, while Tang Un, the assassin with ill intentions, stayed in the capital with peace of mind. Neither side made a move. It was as if nothing had happened. Everything was calm and tranquil. This situation was undoubtedly strange, but if one thought about it carefully, it could not be more normal. Because of the northern wilderness tribes, Wu Ding's idea of sending people to the north to capture Josiah alive was no longer firm. Now, Tang Un had performed a beautiful assassination right under his nose, successfully proving that he did indeed have the ability to threaten the king of Bran. Wu Ding also had to seriously consider the serious consequences if he forced Tang Un to go crazy. With this thought, the idea of going north was undoubtedly even fainter. The situation on Tang Un's side was more or less the same. In the confrontation with Wu Ding, he was naturally in a weak position. There was no other way. He could not blame others for his lack of strength. Although he had played such a beautiful move under Wu Ding's nose, it was actually walking on a tightrope. Once the two of them faced each other, Tang Un would definitely be lying down. Fortunately, his hiding skills were not bad, so he did not have to worry about being found by the other party. He could make a thin needle that was not easy to detect, but was very threatening. In this way, if Wu Ding did not take the initiative to find trouble, Tang Un would have to thank the gods. Naturally, he did not dare to push his luck and force the sword god to go crazy. A strange balance. Both of them were worried that the other would go crazy, but they were also restraining themselves from going crazy first. Therefore, they both felt that it was actually quite good to live in peace. So be it. However, there was no such thing as absolute balance in the world. As long as an external factor interfered, this strange balance would show its fragile nature. However, what was a little unexpected was that it was not Tang Un who was in a weak position that was forced to make the first move. Instead, it was Wu Ding who had the initiative in the Bran Empire that had always been strong. North, the front lines, the bloodstained lands. From the moment the Northern Wilderness Army officially stepped into the Bran border, blood and people were dying almost every second. The thick smell of blood in the air was enough to make one's scalp numb. Even though the bitterly cold winds of the northern lands kept blowing, the smell did not lessen even for a moment. Originally, this kind of situation was already normal for both sides, who had a small fight every 3 years and a big battle every 5 years. The barbarians would attack, while the Bran would defend. Both sides would be in a stalemate, and the barbarians would retreat in defeat. Then, everyone would go back to rest and recuperate. Then, they would choose an auspicious day to fight again. For hundreds of years, the same rhythm had never changed. Perhaps even the gods couldn't bear to watch such a dull and boring show and secretly change something. Therefore, the situation this year was slightly different. From the moment the war started, the Bran army was having a hard time. Zechen Legion's defense zone, a command post to the front line. Report. The 2nd Army's 3 RD Division's Great Sword Regiment has been surrounded at the Bald Mountain, urgently awaiting reinforcements. Didn't we already send the Long Spear Regiment and the Elite Battle Axe Battalion over? Report. The 3 RD Division's Long Spear Regiment has been ambushed by a large group of barbarians 5 kilometers south of the Bald Mountain. They have suffered heavy losses. Report. 10 kilometers west of the Bald Mountain, the Elite Battle Axe Battalion that went to provide reinforcements has been ambushed by barbarians. They urgently need reinforcements. F***CKU. Where's the 1st Army's heavy cavalry? Their target is the Bald Mountain. Kill them. Report. The 1st Army's heavy cavalry. What the F***CK is going on now? Report, General. The 1st Army's heavy cavalry has reported that not long after they set off, they were caught by the elite barbarians' wilderness wolf cavalry. I'm afraid they won't be able to reach the location in time. Report. The 2nd Army's 3 RD Division's Great Sword Regiment has been surrounded at the Bald Mountain, urgently awaiting. With a loud bang, the simple wooden table in the command post where the tactical topographic map was placed shook and creaked. It was as if the table was going to be hit by a big hand in the next moment. Urgently awaiting reinforcements. The energetic voice gradually weakened. The reporting scout lowered his head and stood among the officers in the command post. He was uneasy. His chest rose and fell as he panted heavily. Getting up, General Zichin, who was wearing a high-quality standard armor, walked back and forth in front of the wooden table. He was so angry that he laughed, luring the enemy deep, trapping the lone army, and attacking the reinforcements. Good, good, good. It seems that the simple-minded barbarians have really grown a mind. They even want to play tactics with me. F***CK. General, this is not normal. Seeing that his general was about to flip out, an officer quickly braced himself and walked out. Even if the enemy is determined to trap the lone army and attack the reinforcements, they shouldn't have acted so quickly. They are ahead of us step by step. What are you trying to say? Are the barbarians all worms in my stomach? Or have they all grown divine eyes? I'm afraid it is really caused by the divine eyes. The general's body shook. He seemed to have thought of something and was stunned for a moment. After a while, he waved his hand and said angrily, "Bullshit divine eyes. It's just a kid's alchemy toy. How can the barbarians treat it as a treasure?" F***CK. Although he said so, his tone was full of disdain. However, when he returned to the front of the table, there was still an unconcealable envy on his face. As for the object of envy, it was naturally the divine eyes. Of course, this didn't mean that the barbarians had really opened the divine eyes. It was a military item in the hands of a barbarian officer called the Untamed Divine Eyes. Just a few days ago, when this item officially appeared in front of the brand commanders, it instantly caused an uproar. The structure of this item was very simple. It was just a bamboo tube with a few round lenses. However, it was this seemingly insignificant item that became the dream of the brand commanders. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the reason why the brand were in such a passive situation was because of this item. This was because as long as it was placed in front of the eyes, even a person with poor eyesight could easily see the situation in a distance that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. They were all people who had been on the battlefield for most of their lives. Such a good item was undoubtedly the dream of the brand commanders. Once they understood the use of this item, their eyes immediately lit up. They instantly understood the huge effect this effect could bring on the battlefield. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this was almost revolutionary. For example, right now, when they were in the dark, the barbarians could use this divine eyes of the Untamed Divine Eyes to observe their movements from afar. Then, they could calmly arrange countermeasures and attack the reinforcements. This resulted in the current situation where they had the upper hand. Immediately, after knowing that all the leaders in the barbarian army had this item, the brand immediately became nervous. On one hand, they collected information about this item on a large scale. On the other hand, they quickly looked for a master alchemist to see if they could replicate it in batches. There was a digression in this matter. Let's not talk about the progress of the master alchemist. However, what the master alchemist found out made the brand commanders furious. This item was very famous in the northern wilderness. It was said that the god of the northern wilderness couldn't bear to see his people suffer the pain of defeat. Therefore, he used the little princess of the royal family in the northern wilderness and an alchemist from the Royal Institute of Craftsmen named Matthew to jointly invent this item for the benefit of the people. Therefore, it was named the Divine Eyes of the Untamed Divine Eyes. To simplify, this item was created by the little princess of the northern wilderness and a man named Matthew. Forget about the little princess of the northern wilderness. However, after knowing that Matthew was actually a brand, how could the brand commanders not be angry? Their general idea was that they were being beaten up here because they were betrayed by this traitor. What a disgrace. Little did they know that the barbarians were also very dissatisfied with this. In their opinion, it was natural that the little princess of the royal family was favored by the god of the Untamed Divine Eyes. Moreover, The little princess had long been regarded as the pride of the people of the northern wilderness. She had the right. However, why was the old brand mixed in with them? Later, a rumor gradually spread. It was said that the god of the untamed divine eyes wanted to use the hands of the brand to attack the brand. In addition, it was said that the little princess herself insisted on bringing along the old brand to sign the name of the untamed divine eyes together. Only then did the clamor gradually dissipate. Well, let's not talk about the details for now. Taking the current situation as an example, General Z Chun, who understood the other party's intentions, didn't make the painful decision to call back the heavy cavalry to reinforce the elite Tomahawk battalion that was being ambushed before they suffered even greater losses. As for the Big Sword Regiment that was surrounded on Bald Mountain and the Long Spear Regiment that rushed to the rescue, they could only choose to give up strategically. This was war. Chapter 975. 5 miles north of Bald Mountain. Your Highness, it's been an hour. There are no more brand reinforcements coming. And just now, the Wilderness Wolf Riders reported that the last batch of reinforcements, the Heavy Cavalry Brigade, has returned. It seems like they've given up on these brand soldiers. TCH, no loyalty, hypocritical brand people. Haha, you can't say that, Uncle Xiong. This is war, and this is a wise decision. Yes, you can't say that. You have to know that the holy relic we're holding right now is part of the brand's contribution. Okay, I'm talking about most of the brand people. The conversation above was all in the man language. It sounded a little vague, as if everyone's mouth was stuffed with walnuts. Today, because the royal family of the Northern Wilderness vigorously promoted the brand culture, the official brand language was greatly promoted in the wilderness. Anyone with a bit of status in the Northern Wilderness could speak a little. Of course, there were definitely more young people among them. As for the older ones, such as these old generals from the Northern Wilderness who were wearing high-grade armor, it was hard for them to change their habits. Moreover, their learning ability was indeed greatly reduced. Therefore, when they gathered together, they would most often speak the familiar barbarian language. Oh, right now, not all the Northern Wilderness old generals were here. There was still a young woman, and she was a beautiful woman with soft and perfect facial features that resembled the face of a brand person. And it must be said that this level of beauty was something that few people in brand could match, even in brand. It was only because of the strange thing on the bridge of her beautiful nose that slightly covered her perfect face. And although she was young, she wore the highest grade armor, and from the way the Northern Wilderness old generals flocked around her, it was obvious that her status was not ordinary. Then, when he heard her address him as Your Highness, everything was clear. The current Northern Wilderness Empress only had 2 children, 1 male and 1 female, Tiu and Lan Sha. So this young woman with the soft face of a brand was naturally Her Highness Lan Sha. The old general who was called Uncle Xiong by Lan Sha raised the bamboo tube in his hand, and his face was full of fanaticism and worship. Thank you for the gift from the great wilderness god. This is the best gift the Northern Wilderness people have received in hundreds of years. The great wilderness god above. Everyone pointed to the sky and echoed. Then, a middle-aged general thought of something, looked at Lan Sha and smiled, and added, I think we should also thank Her Highness Lan Sha. She was the one who borrowed the wisdom of the great god of the wilderness to give us this gift. Makes sense. And that brand old man, Xiao man, he said the brand's name in a strange tone and grinned. Using the brand's hands to attack the brand, there is nothing more satisfying than this. Ha! Amidst the laughter, Lan Sha pursed his lips and gently pushed the strange glasses on his nose bridge, which was also the frame of his glasses, and smiled strangely. Another figure flashed in his mind. The godly eyes of the wilderness. You invented the telescope, so you are the great wilderness god? Ha! Needless to say, Lan Sha was thinking of Tang after he caused such a huge commotion and successfully escaped from the imperial city. The Northern Wilderness Empress ordered that all news about Tang be blocked. Even the traces that Tang left behind in the Northern Wilderness Imperial City, such as the glasses, binoculars, and so on, were gradually removed. After all, the Wild Eagle tribe was one of the largest tribes in the northern wilderness. In the end, Tangan killed their successor, the son of the Wild Eagle tribe, Lambit, with a slap before he left. This was a huge feud. Even the northern wilderness empress had to consider the consequences and simply erased all traces of Tang in. It was also because of this that the glory of inventing the glasses and binoculars could only fall to Lan Sha. As for Matthew Mann, it was completely the result of Lan Sha's efforts. Her thinking was very simple. She wanted to give the only friend that Tang In made in the northern wilderness imperial city a chance to rise to the top. This way, it could be considered compensation for stealing the glory. After chatting for a while, it was confirmed that there were no signs of reinforcements from the brand. Uncle Xiong, who was as strong as a bear, looked at the bald mountain in the distance and respectfully asked, "Your Highness, can you order the men to flatten this mountain now?" Since the reinforcements were not coming, it was useless to keep the bait. Any low-ranking barbarian officer could understand such a simple situation and give the order to clear out. But now, this old barbarian general, who obviously had a high status, asked for instructions from Lan Sha first. Moreover, his attitude was extremely respectful. This was something worth pondering. One had to know that status could win respect, but it did not necessarily mean that it could win respect. Especially this group of old generals who had experienced hundreds of battles. Compared to pleasing the royal family, they were more pragmatic and no doubt paid more attention to the outcome of the war, the casualties of the soldiers, and so on. But now, this old barbarian general was asking for instructions from Lan Sha in an extremely humble manner. Moreover, the other barbarian generals around him were also acting as if this was normal. If there was a brand general here and saw this scene, he would be able to see something from this. Yes, Lan Sha's current identity was not only the royal family's royal highness, but also the supreme commander who led the Northern Wilderness Army to attack the brand. The hundreds of thousands of barbarian soldiers gathered from all the tribes in the Northern Wilderness was led by a delicate-looking young woman. Even if this situation was told to the soldiers in the brand's army, no one would choose to believe it. But this was the truth. It was because the current situation was very good. It was because they were standing in the territory of the brand, and it was the hinterland of the Zichan Legion's defense zone that they had never been to before. It was also because, under the command of Lan Sha, they had killed their way all the way. In less than half a month, they had achieved the results that would have taken them 2 months or even longer to achieve in the past. Therefore, the barbarian generals were very convinced. This was not because of their status, but because of the respect that came from the bottom of their hearts for the marshal who had always led them to victory. But now, this marshal who had received perfect recognition was a little absent-minded. He only came back to his senses after the old barbarian general, who was a little embarrassed, called him a few times. He subconsciously raised his head and looked at the bald mountain in the distance. There were not many northern wilderness soldiers at the foot of the mountain. They were walking around leisurely and did not seem to have the intention to attack the mountain for a while. On the other hand, the brand soldiers who were fighting like cornered beasts on the mountain were abnormally busy. They were digging trenches, chopping trees, building simple fortifications, and so on. He waved his hand casually. Attack. Pay attention to the intensity and leave the eastern side for the enemy to break through. Remember, don't make it too obvious. In addition, inform the troops in the east to open up a gap. If they encounter small groups of brand soldiers who escape, they don't have to chase after them. Okay, why? Isn't it better to kill them all? He probably felt that his question was a little stiff, so he scratched his head again. Sorry, Your Highness, I was just asking casually. Haha, it's okay, Uncle Xiong. Lan Sha waved his hand casually and explained with a smile. The reason is very simple. There are no traces of Blank's army reinforcements coming from the east. Well, if you were trapped on the battlefield, isolated and without help, and the troops that were supposed to come to your rescue didn't appear for a long time. In the end, you had no choice but to abandon most of your soldiers and watch them being surrounded and killed. You could only lead the remaining troops to break through the encirclement. Then, you would be lucky enough to go back and find out that you were abandoned by your superior. How would you feel? The old barbarian general's eyes turned scarlet when he heard this. He roared ferociously, I would twist off the head of that bastard superior. How dare he plot against me behind my back? He's courting death. It's just an example. Uncle Xiong, and your superior is me. Lan Sha rubbed his forehead helplessly. I'm sorry, Your Highness. I didn't mean it that way. I really didn't. The old barbarian general came back to his senses and felt ashamed. He kept apologizing while stuttering. Haha, it's just a joke. Don't take it to heart, Uncle Xiong. Lan Sha blinked and suddenly asked, Do you understand now? The old barbarian general was stunned. He then patted his head and said excitedly, I understand, Your Highness. I'll do it right away. After he finished speaking, the old barbarian general licked his lips and revealed a bloodthirsty look again. He was about to turn around and look for someone to pass on the order when a middle-aged barbarian general beside him suddenly focused his gaze and asked in confusion, Hey, whose team is that? More than 1,000 barbarian soldiers were running wildly in the wilderness to the east of Baldy Mountain. They crossed the battlefield and pointed their swords at the foot of Baldy Mountain. The sudden appearance of the barbarian army was obviously beyond the expectations of both sides. It made the Brand's Big Sword group even more nervous. It also made the barbarian team that was besieging the foot of the mountain confused. Pause for a while. The latter sent out a few small teams to negotiate with the barbarians. However, this didn't stop the barbarians' charge. It only slowed them down a little. The barbarians that appeared later didn't change their direction and quickly crossed the foot of the mountain. Then, they roared in unison and raised their iron rods and giant axes. They charged directly at the weak defense that the Brand's army had set up in a hurry. The Brand's Big Sword group was besieged on the mountain. Although they had the geographical advantage, their fighting strength was obviously much weaker than the strong barbarians. In addition, they had suffered heavy casualties and didn't have the advantage in terms of numbers. Therefore, the situation of the battle was naturally one-sided. Roar! This is stealing merit. The old barbarian general roared in anger when he saw the situation. Which damn team is this? Who let them come here? I want to beat them to death. Aren't they causing trouble? We have to deal with them. It shouldn't be like this. We have a team blocking them outside. A group of high-ranking barbarian commanders was enraged by this group of barbarians who had dashed across the battlefield and snatched the military exploits without any hesitation. If it was in the past, they wouldn't be surprised by such a chaotic situation. That was because the barbarian army's fighting style was like a swarm of bees. As for merit, the first to get it would get it. However, after Lan Sha had taken care of the army, the generals had tasted the sweetness. So, they hated this kind of situation that disrupted their military deployment. At this time, a hesitant voice sounded. Isn't this Prince Tiyu's team? The angry denouncement stopped as soon as these words were spoken. The generals came back to their senses and looked at each other in dismay. They couldn't help but shut their mouths. That's right, because they wanted to trap the lone army and kill the reinforcements. They had people guarding all directions outside the Bald Mountain. Logically speaking, this team of over 1,000 shouldn't have appeared here. However, if this team was Prince Tiyu's men, then everything wasn't strange, of course. The supreme commander of the Northern Wilderness Army this time was indeed Prince Lan Sha. However, Tiyu's identity was really troublesome. According to the rumors, this Tiyu should be the son of the Empress and the Demon Z. He had half the blood of the Brand, which was the so-called hybrid. However, as long as the Empress didn't admit this, they really had no choice but to maintain respect for Prince Tiyu. Moreover, this matter obviously involved the secret of the imperial family. Anyone with a brain knew that they couldn't speak carelessly. Otherwise, they would be in big trouble. Even if they are Prince Tiyu's men, they can't act recklessly. The old barbarian general was still indignant, but his tone was obviously weaker. At the same time, he secretly glanced at Lan Sha's expression. Lan Sha's expression was normal. He shook his head and said, Brother is still fighting with the Thunderbolt's army on the Western Front. This is definitely not his idea. It should be his men acting on their own. Forget it. It's not a big deal. Let him be. After a pause, he said seriously, "All right, inform all the troops to move out immediately. At nightfall, they must push the battle line forward by 50 kilometers. After that, Uncle Xiong, a checkpoint will appear in front of your troops. You could try to launch a few waves of attacks. It's best if you can take it down and build fortifications on the spot. It's okay if you can't take it down. The most important thing is to attract the attention of Zichen's heavy cavalry stationed in the canyon 30 kilometers away. After that, Uncle Hai, you can take the opportunity to attack the town behind. The reinforcements will arrive in 4 hours." Without a map in hand, there were no attendants to provide relevant information. Or rather, there was no need for anyone to provide it. All the maps, information, and other information were arranged in an orderly manner in Lan Shah's mind. They were constantly pieced together like a fine, precise machine. After these things were deeply processed, they were transformed into extremely specific and even somewhat complicated orders. The whole scene was like Lan Shah talking to the whistling cold wind in an orderly manner. It was somewhat comical and even more absurd. However, the barbarian generals didn't show any unusual expressions. They listened carefully and remembered in detail. During this time, they didn't make any noise, as if they were afraid to disturb something. They were like a group of obedient apprentices. After a moment, when Lan Shah's last sentence was confirmed, the generals nodded in unison. "Yes, understood." Perhaps this operation in the Bald Mountain wasn't Tiu's idea. However, if Tiu hadn't said anything before, how could a low-level commander of a small 1,000-man troop dare to offend His Highness Lan Shah? This obviously didn't make sense. However, the generals naturally wouldn't say anything about this. Seeing that Lan Shah intended to change the topic and talk about the war, they took their leave and returned to their own troops. After the high-ranking generals dispersed, the young barbarian who had been guarding nearby, like a guard, walked over. He was also an old acquaintance. He was the Imperial Guard Captain of the Northern Wilderness's Imperial City, Andre. When Tang and first met Lan Shah, Andre was Lan Shah's personal guard. It could be said that no discord led to friendship. Tang's friendship with him was quite good. After entering the Imperial City of the Northern Wilderness, he had also received a lot of care from him. "Your Highness, you shouldn't have endured it. His Highness Tiu is demonstrating his power to you." Since their relationship was different, the high-ranking generals didn't dare to say certain things. However, as one of Lan Shah's people, Andre didn't have such considerations. He angrily said out loud, "It's not that serious, Andre. You just stole a small merit." Lan Shah pushed up his glasses and replied casually, "No, Your Highness, you know very well. This isn't just about stealing merit. It's His Highness Tiu testing you. If Your Highness backs down, he will be even more presumptuous." "Enough." Taking a small breath, Lan Shah looked at the bald mountain in the distance that had already quieted down and the figures of the soldiers cleaning up the battlefield. He said, "What do you want me to do? Take down this 1,000-man troop and then completely fall out with Tiu on the battlefield with the brand?" After a pause, Andre still stubbornly said, "At the very least, Your Highness' attitude should be a bit tougher. Your Highness, you are the highest commander personally appointed by the Empress. No matter what, His Highness Tiu is only your subordinate. But now he has crossed the line." I know. Lan Shah seemed to be half-hearted, but also seemed to be thinking about it. He then suddenly turned his head. "I heard that after this war, you will propose to Shini?" Shini, Lan Shah's little follower, was also an old acquaintance. Your Highness, you are changing the topic." Stunned, Andre sighed helplessly. "Is it that obvious? But I am really curious. How about you answer my question first, then I will tell you my thoughts. Don't worry, I will definitely not go back on my word." "I swear on the name of the great God of the wilderness." "Forget it. You said the same thing last time. All right, let's stay away from this woman who has no integrity." What needed to be clear was that when this terrifying machine-like woman officially started to operate, each and every cold and emotionless command was like a sharp knife with a shiny edge, piercing through Bran's defense line until it was full of holes and fragmented. This was an incomparable talent. This was also a natural battlefield commander. Without a doubt, a commander with this kind of talent was definitely hard to come by in 100 years. But unfortunately, this kind of person did not appear in Bran, nor did she appear in the Greycoat army. Therefore, Bran's current situation was very difficult. It was not an exaggeration to say that they had now fallen to the lowest point in the history of war with the Northern Wilderness. What was even worse was that after losing the military god Z, the invincible Zechen Legion seemed to have become less magical. In fact, out of all the legions on the front line, the Zechen Legion had retreated the furthest and suffered the most casualties. Therefore, the Greycoat army's current situation was a bit awkward. The soldiers of the Greycoat army had a firm belief in battle that far surpassed the soldiers of the other factions on the continent. Their morale was high, and they did not lack talented commanders. They also had the purple barrel cannon, a weapon that could change the situation of the war. No matter how one looked at it, they were the embryonic form of an invincible army. But unfortunately, they lacked a commander who could control the overall situation. Therefore, after the initial irresistible force, they had no choice but to enter a difficult period of decision. Chapter 976. In the Greycoat Army's main tent, all the high-ranking officers were present. According to the information from the secret organization, the barbarians' attack is very fierce this time. The Brand's front line is in a state of emergency, and the situation is not optimistic. Because of this, our army is not facing much resistance. The only problem now is that we don't have any cavalry, so as long as we advance in the wild, we will be harassed by mounted archers. Although the purple cannons can repel the enemy, it is not a long-term solution. Also, it is not worth it to exchange a small group of mounted archers for a few explosive crystals. Of course, this is not the main problem we are facing now. Wait, this is a matter for the logistics department. I have to say, leader, there are not many explosive crystals left in the armory. This thing was a banned item in Bran and could not be purchased on a market at all. The black market merchants who had stock had long left before the city fell, and the occasional discovery was just a drop in the bucket, completely unable to keep up with the rate at which it was being consumed. Therefore, I suggest that we limit the supply of explosive crystals and only use them to attack the city. Otherwise, our purple cannons will become a pile of scrap metal. What? Limited supply? Fei Rue, are you kidding me? We are cleaning the battlefield outside. Without explosive crystals, how do you expect us to deal with those four-legged bastards? No, absolutely not. That's right. Either you find us war horses to form a cavalry, or you continue to supply explosive crystals. This is not negotiable. Don't be so agitated, generals. I'm just stating facts. I don't have any intention of targeting you. Well, in any case, we can't continue to supply explosive crystals unconditionally. As for the war horses, look at the things in our logistics department that have 4 legs. Just bring them over. F*CK. What do you mean by this? So, it's not your people who are losing. Other than tables and chairs, what else do you have with 4 legs? Why don't you ride one for me? The sound of tables slamming, scolding, and cursing. In an instant, the main tent was in chaos. More than 10 armored generals were angry and scolding. The young man who was being scolded was Fei Rue, who had some freckles on his face. He seemed to be used to this kind of situation. He sat there calmly, picked up his teacup, and blew on the hot steam. Quiet. With a sudden shout, Josiah, who was sitting at the head of the table, frowned slightly. Her beautiful eyes swept around with killing intent, instantly suppressing the dozen or so angry generals. He then turned to look at the middle-aged officer who had reported to him and nodded. Continue. Yes. The main problem we are facing now is where should the army attack next. If we stick to our original plan and continue to go deep into the northern hinterland, we will definitely take down the Sharon Road, which is not far from the front line. It is one of the important military routes that connects the northern Bran with the front line. Everyone should know that with the current situation at the front line, the Bran will definitely not allow us to take this military route. A burly general snorted and said disdainfully, "It's as if the brand will tolerate us now." The middle-aged officer shrugged helplessly. "You know that's not what I meant. The situation is different now. The public opinion is becoming more and more unfavorable to us." The situation was indeed different. In the past, the Gray Coat Army followed the principle of fighting for the interests of the civilians and rebelled against the oppression of the brand nobles. It could be said that they had a good reason for doing so. Because of this, they were welcomed by the majority of brand citizens and ensured the stability of the territory they occupied. However, now that they had encountered an enemy invasion, if they took this opportunity to take down the brand military route, the situation would be different. It was a very simple logic. No matter what, they were all brand citizens. It was like two brothers who had a conflict. No matter how much they disliked each other, blood was thicker than water. No matter what, they would not help the outsiders to bully their own brothers, right? Of course, the Gray Coat Army citizens did not care about this statement. What family? The brand nobles didn't even treat them as humans and tried every possible way to kill them. There was no need for them to be treated with kindness and acknowledge this heartless brother. However, this statement was now very popular. It was undeniable that the brand officials were behind this. However, it was an indisputable fact that many people agreed with this statement. Even now, in the towns that the army passed by, there were some who were compassionate people who advised them to put aside their prejudices and shout the slogan of unity. Just like the believers were the foundation of the Temple of Light, the civilians were also an important cornerstone for the Gray Coat Army to succeed. Once this cornerstone cracked or even collapsed, the Gray Coat Army would become a tree without roots and water without a source. It would be difficult for them to recruit soldiers, let alone overthrow the brand nobles. Therefore, even though they felt very annoyed, they had to sit here patiently and seriously discuss this issue. Advance, completely fall out with the brand. The cornerstone would be shaken. Retreat, no need to think too much. It was absolutely impossible. It was not appropriate to advance or retreat. What should they do? It's my fault. In the silence, Fry, who was sitting on the left of Josiah, looked a little sad. He sighed, "I was careless. When I was making the battle plan, I didn't take this military route into consideration. This is why we are in such an awkward situation." "No." Fei Rue shook his head. "The battle plan was made by us in the 100,000 Mountains. At that time, the barbarians had not attacked the front line yet. We also did not receive any information about this. How can we blame you?" "Yes, General Fry, you think too much. If you want to blame someone, we are all responsible." Josiah nodded and comforted him. The high-ranking officers beside him also comforted him. However, Fry himself still shook his head with a bitter smile and did not say anything. He knew his own situation. After becoming a marshal, Fry knew that his strategic vision was not enough. Let's not talk about other things for now. Take this military route, for example. Because of the secret organization, the Gray Coat Army and the Brand Palace knew about the invasion of the barbarians in the northern wilderness almost at the same time. If he had noticed this sensitive route at that time, he would have decisively changed the direction of his main attack. Whether it was avoiding it or taking this route before the news of the barbarians' invasion spread, it would have become an established fact. The impact of this matter would have been much smaller. However, he did not notice it at that time. When the army advanced all the way here, he realized that there was a huge pit that stretched for thousands of miles in front of him. If he wanted to take it now, it would have become a hot potato. If he did not take it, he would have to adjust the overall strategy. This way, not only would it cause chaos in the army, the previous series of arrangements would also be useless. It was simply a trap that could not be worse. Seeing that the atmosphere was gloomy again, the middle-aged officer who reported before hesitated and said, "The brand sent news that the negotiation team from the capital is in the nearest town. They also hinted that if we are willing to negotiate, they are willing to make the biggest concession no matter what." What the F***CK? A hot-tempered general could not listen anymore and interrupted rudely. He glared and shouted angrily, "What a joke! Do we want them to give in now? If we fight to the capital, won't everything be ours?" The Gray Coat Army was in a good situation now and had the initiative. Why would they need the brand to add flowers to the brocade? Moreover, the tragic consequences of the previous cooperation were still vivid in their minds. Even if it was to avenge Rosa, they would not negotiate with the brand. After discussing for a while, it was clear that they would not negotiate with the brand. However, they were divided into 3 factions as to whether to take this military route or not. The generals in military uniform had the same opinion. Since the meat was sent to their mouth, they naturally had to take it. Most of the civilian higher-ups in the Gray Coat Army did not agree. They did not know much about military affairs, but they were very concerned about the reaction of the people. They had relied on this to make a name for themselves. They knew that water could carry a boat, but it could also capsize a boat. There were also leaders like Josiah and Fry who had decisive opinions. They all remained silent. However, if they spoke, then this matter would be settled. Oh, this did not include Fei Rue, who was also silent. It was unknown whether this matter did not concern him or he was thinking about something. This guy, who was called a smart person by Tang An, was holding a teacup with a thoughtful expression on his face. Then, a group of civil and military higher-ups in the Gray Coat Army slammed the table and glared at each other. They were just about to find a place to fight when Josiah spoke. He knocked on the table. The sound was not loud, but it caused the bustling scene to instantly quiet down. Looking around, the young noble lady who had been reactionary back then now had the aura of a leader. I have decided that the original strategic battle plan will not change. Leader, the original plan did not change, which was to agree to fight and take over this military route called Sharon. When one of the Gray Coat Army higher-ups heard this, he immediately became anxious and opened his mouth to say something. However, Josiah waved his hand and said, "Let me say it. I know what you want to say." The good reputation of the Gray Coat Army was accumulated over hundreds of years by sacrificing the lives of countless Gray Coat Army soldiers and civilians. It was not easy to get it, so we should cherish it. However, compared to our original purpose of coming out of the 100,000 mountains this time, overturning this rotten brand empire is not worth mentioning. To be honest, although we came out with the banner of revenge this time and have been unstoppable all the way, I have always felt that doing things is not very straightforward. There are restrictions everywhere, including my own restrictions. It is like walking with a precious piece of porcelain in your arms. You want to be praised by passers-by, but you are also afraid that you will break this piece of porcelain. Therefore, when we spread the news, we only talked about how much we have been wronged and how we want revenge. However, we did not talk about our true intention of overturning the brand empire and rebuilding a new country. What are we afraid of? We are afraid that the brand people will not support us. They will think that we're doing this for our own selfish ambitions and that we want to usurp power. After a pause, Josiah took a deep breath and said, "This is not right. It is also deceiving. Not only are we deceiving the people, but we are also deceiving ourselves." When the higher-ups heard this, they were silent. This was the truth. The problem at hand, on the surface, was the problem of whether or not to occupy the military road, but in fact it was not. They knew very well that the Gray Coat Army and the Brand Empire had now broken off completely. It was not too much to say that they were from 2 opposing countries. Since this was the case, they certainly did not need to care about the life and death of the other country. If they wanted to occupy the military road, they could do so. However, the reality was that they did not dare to say this out loud. They were afraid that once they did, the brand people who supported and welcomed them yesterday would look at them with the same hatred as they looked at the barbarians today. I don't know how you feel, but I don't like this feeling. I feel like a thief, Josiah said to himself. So this time, I have decided to fight openly and occupy this military road. Then I will announce to the world that we are the new Gray Coat Army. We have nothing to do with the rotten Brand Empire. If the Brand soldiers come, we will fight. If the Northern Wilderness barbarians come, we will also fight. However, this has nothing to do with the outside world. It is only because they have intruded into our territory. Bang! The hot-tempered general stood up and slammed the table. He said emotionally. F*CK. That's the logic. No wonder I always felt uncomfortable. Leader is so King clear. Sorry, leader, look at my stupid mouth. I really didn't mean to curse you, Huh. In the command tent, the solemn atmosphere that was caused by Josiah's words was instantly destroyed by the stammering general. Josiah waved his hand and continued, From now on, we must show our flag and fight for ourselves. As for the reaction of the Brand people, if they continue to support us, we will welcome them. If they strongly oppose us, we will not make things difficult for them. After the war, we will arrange for them to go to the Brand Empire. Of course, that is if the Brand Empire still exists by then. Haha, I love hearing this. So domineering. Leader is so mighty. Most of the people sitting in the tent were uncouth people. They were not the people sitting in the Brand Empire's parliament. Therefore, as long as the atmosphere was relaxed, the rhythm of the conversation would change. It was very joyful. Amidst the applause, Fei Rue clapped his hands and stood up with a smile. Since we're enemies, there's nothing much to say. Didn't the Brand have bad intentions and want to see us make a fool of ourselves? Why don't we spread the news that the Blank's army came to provoke us? Then we could take over this important military route. What do you think? Josiah was stunned when he heard this. He quickly thought about the pros and cons of this plan and realized that it was very beneficial for them. Moreover, it didn't conflict with their plan. It was a good addition. Well, it was just that the method was a little bad. This is a good idea. Not only will we have a good reputation, but we will also have a good military route. This is a good idea. Although Joshua's words had opened the knot in everyone's heart, the higher-ups still didn't want their reputation to be tarnished. Now that they heard Fei Rue's idea of killing 2 birds with 1 stone, they were overjoyed and agreed. The generals didn't have any objections. However, they didn't think too much about it. They just thought that they could take over the military route and piss off the other side. It was a great idea. Fry patted Fei Rue's skinny shoulder and said seriously, Let's discuss it. Don't work in the logistics department. That's not a place for men. Why don't you transfer to the combat team? Trust me, you have the potential to be a sly fox on the battlefield. Fei Rue laughed, but didn't say anything. What kind of joke was this? With his small body, he might not be able to become a sly fox on the battlefield if he was transferred to the combat team. However, he should be able to become a sly fox on the battlefield. Fry was just joking. Seeing that Fei Rue didn't react, he didn't mind. He continued to ask, Since we have already come up with this idea, let's solve the remaining problems. Where's the Blank's army that came to provoke us? You're not thinking of using our soldiers to pretend to be them, are you? How can that be? Swords have no eyes. Fei Rue's eyes flashed. He waved his hands and said quickly, I've already thought about it. Isn't that the military route? Now that the Brand's front line is so tight, there must be a lot of supplies passing through here. This is the Blank's army that came to provoke us. If we intercept them, not only will we be able to take over the military route, we will also be able to make a lot of money. Haha, what do you think of this idea? Why aren't you saying anything? Can you give me your opinion? For I wasn't the only one who didn't know what to say. In fact, after Fei Rue explained the plan, the command tent was silent. Everyone looked at this guy who was talking about making a lot of money. Even his eyes were shining with the light of gold coins. They were completely speechless. Pause for a while. Fry shook his head and said, I was wrong. You're not a sly fox on the battlefield. You're always a miser. Just stay in the logistics department and use your talents. The combat team can't accommodate a god like you. Without a doubt, once the Grey Coat Army's problem was solved, the Brand's problem will be solved. It had to be said that Brand had been having a really bad time these past few years. He had been plagued with misfortune. The Northern Wilderness tribes and the Grey Coat Army. One was on the outside, one was on the inside. There was no connection between the two, but now they were doing the same thing, which was to constantly shake and destroy the foundation of this huge monster. Time was really an interesting thing. The Brand Empire, the king of the Shiza continent that had stood for hundreds of thousands of years. With the accumulation of time, it had become luxuriant and deeply rooted. However, it was also because of the passage of time that it became more like a broken boat, full of holes and about to sink. P.S. This chapter and the previous chapter might not be pleasing to write. However, this is a necessary foreshadowing. So, readers, please don't make a fuss. Also, please give me your recommendation votes. There are basically no regrets in writing this book until now. It's just that the number of recommendation votes is a little shabby. As the saying goes, one must be honest and kind. So, I hope that all of you can develop the habit of reading the new chapters every day before logging in a vote for the raccoon. Well, the principle is that 1 or 2 votes are not too few, and 8 or 10 votes are not too many. Ha, carrot, carrot. Chapter 977. It must be admitted that even if the Bran Empire was a rotten ship, this rotten ship still had 3 caddies of nails. These 3 caddies of nails are the so-called foundation of the empire, and this foundation was even more obvious under the feet of the imperial court. Therefore, when the news of the unfavorable situation on the front line came back, the capital was in an uproar and caused a lot of heated discussions. But that was it. There was no sense of panic like an impending disaster. This didn't mean that the arrogant people of the capital were calm, but they didn't really care. To put it bluntly, the news of the unfavorable situation on the front line was just a topic for them to talk about. It was a topic that was relatively popular recently, and if they didn't say a few words, they would be outdated. Therefore, the nobles at the elegant banquets talked about it, while the commoners at the ordinary tables talked about it. In the big and small taverns, it was easy to hear people scolding the northern wilderness barbarians for being vulgar and the Blank's army for being incompetent, and so on. Or, in some lively places, there was a young man in the capital who suddenly shouted, "Fight the bandits, I'll donate a knife. Fight the barbarians, I'll donate a *King life." Well, it didn't matter if the latter was to declare their loyalty to the empire or just to attract the admiration of a beautiful girl in the crowd. But what was certain was that they really didn't take it seriously. Of course, not everyone was as heartless as that. Some people also found something strange. That was, when the northern wilderness barbarians invaded, it would take a few months for the news to reach the capital of the Bran. Sometimes, before the news even reached here, the barbarians on the front line had already been defeated. But this time was different. It hadn't even been a month since the start of the war, but the news had already spread throughout the Bran, outside the capital, in Wu Ding's small residence. Previously, High Pagoda would go up the mountain about once every 10 days, but now, he came almost every day, and the news he brought was getting heavier by the day. "Master, the front line can't hold on much longer. Of the 3 legions, the Zechen Legion suffered the most damage, followed by the Tsangyan Legion. The Thunder Legion was still able to hold their ground. It's just that the other 2 battle lines are retreating. So, Thunder has no choice but to retreat in order to avoid being left alone. The military has speculated that the supreme commander of the barbarians should be in the Zechen battle zone, which has suffered heavy casualties. Only the location. Yes, the northern wilderness is very secretive about the identity of the supreme commander. Even the middle-ranking barbarian officers only received the military order before the war. They don't know anything else. They can't even interrogate the captives." Hesitating for a moment, Sea Tower continued in a low voice. "Some people speculate that the commander this time might be the Northern Wilderness Empress." "Impossible." Wu Ding shook his head in denial without even thinking about it. His attitude was firm. Sea Tower was stunned for a moment. Then, as if he understood something, he nodded. "It's just a guess. We also don't think it's possible. Let's not talk about whether the Northern Wilderness Empress has the ability to do so. Even if she does, she wouldn't do such a dangerous thing on the battlefield. Yes, the reason why we speculate like this is because the commander of the barbarians that the Thunderbolt's army encountered is His Highness Tiu from the Northern Wilderness. So, that's not the reason." Waving his hand to interrupt, Wu Ding hesitated for a moment. His face showed traces of reminiscence. "I've seen the Northern Wilderness Empress a few times. She's very talented and rare. It's not an exaggeration to say that she's a natural commander on the battlefield. She has the ability to win battles, But this time it can't be her, because the Zechen Legion has suffered the most casualties. The Zechen Legion has suffered the most casualties. How can you be so sure that it wasn't the Northern Wilderness Empress who did it? What kind of logic is this? Sea Tower couldn't understand. However, seeing that Wu Ding didn't want to talk about it, he could only suppress his doubts. Wu Ding, who seemed to know the relationship between Z and the Northern Wilderness Empress, would never have thought that the person who came this time was not the Northern Wilderness Empress, but the descendant of the Northern Wilderness Empress, Lan Sha. He would never have thought that the reason why she chose the Zechen Legion as a breakthrough was not for any other strategic considerations, but because she wanted to see the place where her mother and Z used to live. Then, she naturally followed the shortcut and broke in. Master, the situation at the front line needs to be planned early. Last night, the military in the north sent back 3 battle reports. They hope that 2 complete legions from the south will immediately rush to the front line to provide support. This shows how fierce the barbarians' attacks are. The royal court is panicking now. His Majesty wants to hear your opinion. What opinion can I have as a warrior? Wu Ding shook his head and laughed. I'm just Wu Ding, not Z, and definitely not the war god. His words sounded a little dejected. He didn't have the peerless grace that the guardian of the brand should have. However, that was the truth. Wu Ding was indeed the war god, and it was also true that he was the #1 expert in the continent. However, he was still just a warrior. Even if he could fight for 3,000 miles with a single sword, how could he fight against millions of troops? In the current situation, a peerless warrior was of limited use, unless a war god appeared out of nowhere. However, the brand had more than 1,000 years of war history, and only one person, Z, had appeared. Therefore, this idea could only be imagined. Let's talk about the Gray Coat Army. Wu Ding suddenly changed the topic and said, compared to the invasion of the Northern Wilderness, their sudden emergence shocked me more. How are they doing now? Haita couldn't fully understand Wu Ding's point of view. In his opinion, the Northern Wilderness barbarians were undoubtedly a greater threat. However, he still replied, they're similar to the barbarians. Their attacks are fierce. The area around the 100,000 mountains is almost under their control. However, compared to the mysterious barbarian commander, their commander is a little immature. Their strategic layout is moderate, so they're still under control. What's more troublesome is that they've recently occupied an important military route, causing problems with the transportation of resources and reinforcements here. This has angered the court who's preparing for negotiations. It seems that they've steeled their hearts to fight Brand to the end. Nodding, Wu Ding didn't look surprised. They can't be blamed. They stabbed them in the back first, so they can't blame them for taking revenge now. Haita frowned slightly. But the timing now, he shook his head. Since they've already become enemies, don't expect them to be soft-hearted. The timing now is the best time for them to take advantage of the situation. Wu Ding was very open-minded. He wasn't surprised that the Gray Coat Army wanted to take advantage of the situation. He just sighed slightly and said, it's us, especially the royal court, who should reflect on this. A huge empire that makes its own people hate it to the core. It's not surprising that it's in a difficult situation now. But we're Brand's people after all. It's just us. Wu Ding raised his hand and rubbed between his eyebrows. But you're right. We're Brand's people, so we have to fight for this empire for the rest of our lives, even if we know it's rotten and disgusting. Haita's spirit was lifted when he heard this. He didn't care about the loneliness in the first half of Wu Ding's words. He only noticed his master's attitude and tone in the second half. What should we do? It's very simple. We'll deal with the Northern Wilderness barbarians the same way we dealt with the Gray Coat Army before. Haita was stunned for a moment. He raised his eyebrows. Master, you mean capture the king? It's impossible to capture the king. There are also masters in the Northern Wilderness Imperial City, but we could try to capture the commander. Wu Ding narrowed his turbid eyes. The Northern Wilderness tribe's army structure is different from our brand's. Our system is more complete. If the general dies, there's still the deputy. If the officer dies, there's still the leader. No matter who we lose, there won't be a big problem with the command system. Just like how we lost Z, the military god, and the Zechen Legion didn't collapse. But the Northern Wilderness Army can't do that. They rely too much on the command of their superior officers. Of course, this is determined by their actual situation. Ordinary barbarians generally don't have high intelligence, so they have to rely on their superiors. Otherwise, they're just scattered sand. That's why the Northern Wilderness Army chose to retreat after Z successfully hunted down Onros last year. Haita nodded in agreement. He then frowned and asked, "But we don't have any information about the mysterious commander. Didn't we already figure out the general location? As long as we continue to fight in the Zechen Legion's war zone, we'll be able to find some clues." "Then who's going?" Haita looked up at Wu Ding. He thought of something and shook his head firmly. "No, Master, you can't go." Wu Ding smiled and waved his hand to interrupt him. "I'm not going. Of course, it's useless even if I go. This is an assassination. We have to let the professionals do it." Haita was relieved when he heard this. He lowered his head and muttered, "Professionals. There are many strong people in the Imperial Court, but there aren't many who are good at assassination. Maybe we can contact the Thieves' Union and ask them to recommend a few people. We can also give them a big reward. There's no need to go through so much trouble." Wu Ding's lips curled into a smile. "Isn't there a professional assassin in the capital?" Haita was stunned. "Master, you mean, Tang Yin?" Haita quickly realized that there was indeed such a powerful person hiding in the capital, and he had to admit that the other party's professional skills were beyond doubt. Of course, not only did he threaten to assassinate the king, but he also succeeded in killing the traitor under the sword god's nose. With his kind of courage and battle record, he was a big shot in the whole-size continent. It would be great if he could help, but he probably won't help us. It's not probably, it's definitely. We are enemies, but that's under normal circumstances. If our current problem becomes a common problem between us and them, then it's different." After a pause, Wu Ding showed a sly look like an old fox who jumped into a chicken coop. He said patiently, "Think about it. Why did he come to the capital? Think about the Grey Coat Army's current location. If I remember correctly, 100,000 mountains is very close to the front line, right?" "Yes, the distance between the two places is only a few hundred kilometers. If it's fast, Haita's body suddenly trembled. He opened his mouth. "Master, you mean to open a gap on our side and let the Grey Coat Army and the barbarians... At this point, the border defense line is absolutely impossible to defend, right?" He spread his hands. "Since that's the case, it's normal to divert the trouble to someone else on the battlefield. I think at that time, little Tang Un will help." Hao took a deep breath. His mind was spinning crazily as he quickly calculated the feasibility of this plan. After a moment of silence, he licked his lips. "Master is wise. The problem now is how to negotiate with Tang In about this. At least, we need to let him know. But we don't even know where he is now." Wu Ding seemed to have thought about all the details. He casually said, "Then my grandson will have to suffer." "A good idea." Soon, the people in the capital found that they recently had another favorite topic to talk about. Philip was in trouble. As a legendary figure who caused the divorce rate in the capital to rise year by year, who was loved and hated by the women in the capital, and who made the men in the capital want to beat 100 times a day, the capital's flower wolf, Philip. He had harmed countless girls' chastity and ruined countless young women's chastity, because he had a wide range of tastes and interests, from the wives and concubines of the palace officials to the daughters of ordinary people. As long as he liked them, he would never be picky. He had caused countless love deaths. The people who wanted to kill him could line up from the palace castle to the East Gate. This kind of person caused trouble every 2 or 3 days. There was nothing strange about it. But this time, the situation was different. No one knew what he was thinking. He actually wanted to hook up with the young wife of an old general who had a lot of power in the military. One had to know that the old general had waited for his first wife to pass away with great difficulty. Only then did he marry his beautiful young wife, who had been raised outside, into his family. Who would have thought that before the happy event was over, he would be targeted by the wolf? Otherwise, Why would he be called an old general? His temper was fiery. After spoiling the good thing, he used his old body to hold a long machete and chased after Philip for 3 streets. It caused an uproar in the entire city. Everyone knew about it. Of course, unlike the ordinary people who were talking about how the capital's flower wolf was completely defeated this time, the people in the upper circle of the capital knew Philip's true identity. So at first, they just treated this matter as a joke. Just like how Philip had been forced to jump over the wall with a walking stick when he had hooked up with the daughter of an old counselor. In the end, it was left unsettled. But then, the situation changed. First, the Philip family announced that they would cut ties with him. Then, the god of swords, who usually did not care about worldly affairs, seemed to be unable to stand his grandson's character. He personally sent a message to the palace castle to punish him severely. This caused the entire capital to be in an uproar. There was no need to think about it. With Philip's crimes, especially the countless cases of him ruining the chastity of young women, once they investigated and punished him severely, he would definitely be sent to the gallows. Just as the nobles were lamenting that Philip had completely gone overboard this time, the situation after that was a little strange. In the first trial, not only did the old general's beautiful young wife not come, none of the other victims stepped forward to testify against Philip. It was as if he had been wronged like a pure white flower. Of course, that wasn't the case. The court had miscalculated. They had thought that with Philip's reputation, there would be at least dozens of young women in the capital city who had been seduced by him, even though they hadn't been counted by the system. Not counting the unmarried young women, the brand's culture was still more liberal. As long as the young men and women were willing, it was not considered a crime. Now that they had this opportunity, wouldn't they come forward to expose his true identity? Thinking of this, the court did not spend any more effort to investigate and summon the victims. But who would have thought that in the end, none of the victims stepped forward to testify? When questioned, they flatly denied it. However, there were many resentful men who had been cuckolded who came and complained for a long time. Unfortunately, their testimonies did not count. This scene almost caused the old general to vomit blood and pass out. In the end, after a stalemate for half a day, the first trial ended hastily. Philip returned home safe and sound and waited for the second summons. After this incident, Philip's name was completely spread. He was like a living legend, worshipped by countless young men in the noble circle. What kind of amazing skills in picking up girls was this miracle? Not only did he not receive any resentment after ruining someone's chastity, but the victims also tacitly supported him in secret. Such a magnificent feat was probably unprecedented and would never be replicated in the future. However, as the real party involved, Philip did not feel that proud now. In the evening, in the courtyard of the isolated loft, Philip was drinking alone, feeling very gloomy. It was not because of the current situation, but because he had no choice but to be used as a tool, and he could not say anything about it. He tilted his head back and drank fiercely, muttering resentfully, "You really are my grandfather, my biological grandfather. You're so good at tricking your own juniors. Damn it, I've been careless in making friends. How did I get to know such a disaster like you? I didn't get any benefits, but a bunch of sh*t. In the end, the unlucky one is always me. Why? I already said that I'm not close to him. It's no use even if he kills me. He still won't come out." A cold wind blew past, and he shivered. "Forget it. You should hurry up and come out. Otherwise, who knows what kind of tricks that old man will come up with. I can't take it." He shook his head, tilted his head back, and drank another mouthful. When there was no more wine, he shook it and threw it away, shouting, "George, Uncle George, bring me another bottle of wine. Today, I want to, get drunk to solve all my worries." As soon as he finished speaking, a middle-aged man with white hair and dressed like a standard butler appeared in the courtyard with a bottle of wine. He approached, but did not directly hand over the bottle. Instead, he looked at the slightly drunk Philip, sat down opposite him, picked up the wine bowl, and poured some wine for himself. "Huh, not bad, not bad. Let's drink together. It's more flavorful when we drink together. Come, fill it up for me." The middle-aged butler filled the wine bowl in Philip's hand to the brim, and then looked at him with his chin propped on his hand. Drink. Now, why aren't you drinking? Philip half opened his slightly tipsy eyes, looked at the middle-aged butler who was still in a contemplative state, and urged, Drink. Oh, right, let's have a toast first, I say. Blocking the wine bowl that Philip handed over, the middle-aged butler rubbed his forehead and frowned slightly. Is there any meaning in your old man doing this? Didn't he already sound me out? Even if he wants to meet and talk to me, he can just say directly. Is there a need to, use such a self-harming trick? WH what? Uncle George, tell me. F***CK. Chapter 978. F***CK. You're really here. Philip cursed. When he came back to his senses, his drunkenness instantly dissipated. He asked nervously, "Oh, right, where's Uncle George? You didn't do anything to him, right? He's just an ordinary person." He rolled his eyes and pointed at the back door of the house. F***CK. I'm not a homicidal maniac. He's fine, he's sleeping peacefully. Oh, what are you doing? He turned around and saw Philip reaching out to grab him, his face full of anger. What am I doing? I didn't F***king do anything. SH*T. I'm puzzled. Who offended who? Why is it that every time it's related to you, the unlucky one is always me? Just let me choke you to death. Calm down, calm down. Or, let me choke you to death, the effect will be the same. Philip instantly sobered up and compared the strength of both sides. He wisely let go of his hand and sat back down, picking up the wine bowl. Ha, it's Tang In. Long time no see. Come, cheers. Tang In tidied his clothes and shook his head with a smile. He picked up the wine bowl and drank it with a ding. He wiped the wine stains from the corner of his mouth. Tell me, what's your old man trying to do by making such a big fuss and dragging you into this? He wants you to help him kill someone, Philip said truthfully. Oh, Tang In was stunned when he heard this. He looked at Philip as if he was looking at an idiot. Are you kidding me? Your old man is the god of swords, the #1 expert in the continent. He wants me to kill someone? Are you sure you're not kidding me? Or did your old man find a little grandmother for you outside and was found out? To protect his reputation, he wants to silence her, but he can't bring himself to do it. I'm sure you're kidding me. Philip waved his hand in annoyance. Seriously, my old man said he's not a professional. He wanted to find a professional assassin, but he thought of you, who's still in the capital. Oh, then business has come knocking on my door. Tang In suddenly nodded and knocked on the table. Let me say this first. I haven't entered the Thieves' Union to take on missions for many years. I don't do things easily, but when I do, the price is very expensive. Of course, this was just a joke, but Tang Un had already carefully checked the surrounding security, and the members of the gray space were also monitoring nearby, so they had time to joke around. Of course, the most important thing was that Tang Un did not believe that Philip would plot against him. But Philip seemed to take it seriously and replied with certainty, "That's not a problem, although the old man didn't say so. But if you really succeed, you can take whatever treasures you like from the Imperial Treasury." No way. Tang In quickly waved his hand to refuse and got up to leave. Who knew if this was Wu Ding's plan to lure the tiger away from the mountain? Besides, he didn't dare to leave the capital city at all. Even if he could leave, the people Wu Ding wanted to kill were not ordinary people. He did not want to take the risk. Hey, wait a minute. Just treat it as helping me. You should at least let me finish my words. Philip helplessly got up and pulled Tang In. He said gloomily, "Otherwise, who knows what kind of tricks the old man will come up with to mess with me." He sat down again. "It's fine if you don't cooperate. Can't he catch you himself and throw you into the bed of the old general's wife?" Cooperate? Oh, you misunderstood. That's true. Tang In looked up in surprise. What are you looking at? I was set up by senior brother Haida. Philip looked angry. Rolinda said, "Oh, the old general's wife said that the old man had to go to the military headquarters for a meeting and would only be back at night. So I took the time to go to her house. Who knew that senior brother would find an excuse to call him back? And he just happened to meet us. F***CK. I won't be angry if I don't mention this. I didn't even take off my F asterisk king pants, and I was chased by that old man for a few streets. What an injustice. That's not the point, bastard. Looking at Philip, who was banging on the table and cursing and complaining, Tang and held his forehead. He knew that he had underestimated this guy's bottom line. Okay, let's get serious. Who do you want to kill? Philip licked his lips rather unwillingly. Only then did he remember that he still had business to attend to. He thought for a moment and quickly said, "You know the current situation at the front line, right? Yes, Bran is being beaten very badly. He can't even defend himself. This situation is a bit abnormal. It's said that the reason is that there's a mysterious commander in the northern wilderness. His commanding tactics are very strange, and he's almost invincible. So, you want me to kill that commander? Huh, that's right. Hey, don't go. Think about it. Think your ass." Tang's mouth twitched. He was so angry that he laughed. "I finally understand now. You're not teasing me. It's your old man who's teasing me. What kind of joke is this? Let him try. That's a battlefield where people are dying every minute. That's the commander in the northern wilderness who has hundreds of thousands of barbarians in his hands. Do you really think I'm wearing my underwear on the outside? No way. Think about it. Aren't you a professional?" Philip hugged Tang's arm and looked like he would not let go even if he was beaten to death. This isn't a matter of being a professional or not. Anyone who wants to die is a F asterisk king professional. Who cares? I'm not going. This was true. If it was someone else, even if it was a little risky, Tang might really consider it and use it to negotiate with Wu Ding. However, this request was too ridiculous. It was true that Tang had the soul of the commander in the northern wilderness, but that was under special circumstances. At that time, there were not many guards around Tang, and he was right in front of him. Tang could kill him with a single slash. Under normal circumstances on the battlefield, the commander would be surrounded by at least tens of thousands of soldiers. There were also many experts protecting him in the open and in the dark. Assassinating such a person was not as easy as killing the king of a country. It would be an understatement to say that there was only a slim chance of survival. Moreover, the reason why the Grey Coat Army was able to do so well now was definitely because the main forces of the Bran were involved in the invasion of the barbarians. In this way, no matter how stupid Tang was, he would not be able to do anything to help the Bran Empire. Thinking of this, Tang could not help but look at Philip, who was like a tree bag bear. "That's not right. You know where I stand. How can you say this kind of thing? What are you trying to do?" What stand? I don't understand what you're talking about." Philip saw that Tang was suspicious, and his eyelids suddenly twitched. He quickly got up and let go of Tang's arm. He waved his hand repeatedly. "Since you really don't want to go, then forget it. I'll pass your attitude to the old man later. There's nothing for me to do here." Tang saw this and frowned. He looked at Philip deeply and did not ask anything. He nodded and said, "That's it then. I'll treat you to a drink next time." After saying this, he simply turned and left. Looking at Philip's abnormal behavior, it was impossible to say that there was nothing wrong with this. However, just like how Philip did not hide his abnormal behavior and secretly reminded him, Tang did not continue to ask. The reason was simple. Although they had different standpoints, they were indeed friends. And since they were friends, it was naturally better not to ask questions that would make things difficult for each other. Pay more attention to Josiah and the Grey Coat Army. Just as Tang was about to step out of the courtyard, Philip suddenly spoke. He looked up at the dark night sky and concentrated as if he wanted to see the stars in the sky. He said casually, "I'm not sure about the specific situation, but my old man once said that your weakness is Josiah, and Josiah's weakness is the Grey Coat Army." Tang paused and turned around. He nodded seriously. "Thank you." Philip did not need to say these words, and he should not have said them. But now that he had said them, Tang had to thank him. "Why are you thanking me?" "Hey, don't try to frame me. I'm a very principled person. I won't say anything. I won't admit it even if you say it." Understood." Tang smiled and turned to walk towards the high wall of the courtyard. He said, "Then let's exchange information. When I came here, I saw your victim's family, the old general, leading a group of people over here with sticks and whatnot. At first, I thought you were going to put on a show, but now... He came to the bottom of the wall and listened. There was already noise coming from the front of the attic. Yes, they're here. Damn, why didn't you say so earlier? Philip was shocked when he heard this. He no longer looked as calm as before and rushed towards the courtyard door like fire. However, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. Tang and was coming from that direction. He stopped and turned around. He saw Tang in waving his hand and easily crossing the tall courtyard wall and disappearing. Goodbye. F***CK. There was a heart-wrenching scream. Come back, this wall is too high. Come back and give me a hand, bastard. Chapter 979. The lively imperial capital Flower Wolf trial finally came to an end because none of the victims were willing to testify. The second trial ended with Philip being acquitted. After this battle, the name of the imperial capital Flower Wolf was completely spread throughout Bran. It also became a topic of interest for the nobles and commoners in the capital for a long time. When the women heard the news, they had mixed feelings of love and hate. The men were envious and jealous. They lamented that the gods had taken a nap and allowed this scourge to be free. However, no matter what kind of feelings they had, they were soon forgotten by the people after a new topic was created. This was the capital city. It was bustling, prosperous, and faster than any other city. Being in it, Tang and did not have the time to enjoy the liveliness and the prosperity. After returning from Philip's residence that night, Tang and spent the whole night thinking about the meaning of Philip's words. Pay more attention to Josiah and the Grey Coat Army. Early the next morning, Tang sent out the members of the Grey Space to collect all the information about the Grey Coat Army and Josiah. There was very little information about the latter. He appeared most often on the arrest warrant of the various unions in Bran. In comparison, there was a lot of information about the former. As long as the content was relevant, Tang would enter it into the system first. Then, he would organize, analyze, and judge. In the end, he was confused. From what Philip said, Wu Ding seemed to want to use Josiah and the Grey Coat Army to force him to submit. However, Tang still could not figure it out no matter how hard he thought about it. Josiah's safety was needless to say. She was now in the army, protected by David and hundreds of thousands of soldiers. As long as Wu Ding did not go north, Tang really could not think of anyone who could threaten Josiah's safety. Now that he was in the capital, it was impossible for Wu Ding, who was afraid of breaking the vases, to attack the rat for fear of breaking the vases. Needless to say, the Grey Coat Army was in a good situation. Unless Bran was willing to disregard the safety of the border and directly pull back one of the three main armies from the front lines, Tang really did not have to worry about any power that could threaten the Grey Coat Army that was getting stronger and stronger. Could it be that Wu Ding was teasing him? Well, Tang and Wu Ding had spent some time together. With his childish temperament, it was not impossible for him to tease him. However, as the protector of the Empire, Wu Ding did not seem to be in the mood to joke at this time when the Bran was in danger. Tang was conflicted. It did not feel good to be schemed against. What was worse was that he knew that he was being schemed against, but he didn't know when or where to start. Day after day, half a month passed. The capital was still bustling and lively. Tang became more and more anxious. It was a kind of intuition. Tang felt that Wu Ding was not teasing him this time. Something bad was indeed happening, and it was directed at him. Just as Tang, whose patience was about to run out, was about to plan to take the risk and wait at the foot of Wu Ding's mountain to block the insider, Wu Ding's eldest disciple, Haida, a piece of news came. The news was spread by Wu Ding, passed through Philip, and then from the exposed personnel of the capital's secret organization, and finally to Tang. It was a thick stack of small notes. It should be Wu Ding's handwriting. Little Tang, we're in trouble. Carrot dash carrot. It was a few simple words with a strange, smiley face symbol that seemed familiar. It was similar to the familiar tone left by Tang when he killed the traitor under Wu Ding's nose. Under the note was a folded map. It was a military map of a certain area in the north. Several arrow lines were drawn in 3 colors. Tang did not understand military strategy, but he could still understand military maps. Moreover, the map in front of him was not complicated at all. The gray area represented the Gray Coat Army. It was located in the middle of the map and was a little narrow. A part of the Gray Coat Army's east, west, south, and north was marked in black. It represented the Bran Empire and was extremely vast. There was no problem with such a sharp contrast. The Bran's territory was indeed very large, especially in the north. There was no cover, and no one knew where the end was. Therefore, even though the Gray Coat Army had been causing a ruckus for quite some time after they killed their way out of the 100,000 Mountains, the actual territory they occupied was still a little small compared to the vast territory of the Bran. In the north of the Gray Coat Army, in a small area that was not surrounded by the Bran Empire, a shocking red arrow followed a line named Sharon on the map and ran through the Bran area. It extended all the way to the Gray Coat Army's territory. Looking at the trend, if it continued to move forward, it would definitely cut the area occupied by the Gray Coat Army in half. And that red arrow represented the Northern Wilderness Barbarians. There was a small note on the side. X day, X year, the Northern Wilderness tribes officially broke through the Bran border blockade. Yes, the day before yesterday. At the moment, there was no news of the Northern Wilderness tribes breaking through the Bran border blockade. At least, there was no news in the capital city. And there was no doubt that if this news were to spread, even the people of the capital city, who were living a comfortable life, would instantly fall into endless panic and panic. It should be known that in the hundreds of years of war history, although the Northern Wilderness tribes had never stopped attacking and invading, the actual situation was that they had never really successfully broken through the blockade and killed their way into the heart of the Bran. Now, they had succeeded, and the people who could possibly sacrifice their flag for this breakthrough was the Gray Coat Army. Seeing this, and combining it with the message that Philip had sent on behalf of him, Tang understood what Wu Ding meant. Sure enough, when he opened the map, there was a thick stack of documents. Inside were all the information collected by the Bran military about the mysterious barbarian commander. Casually flipping through it, Tang put it down and thought about it for about 3 seconds. He waved his hand and said, "Prepare the horses. We're going back to the north." North, Gray Coat Army, Central Tent. They broke through so quickly. Is it really the Northern Wilderness Barbarians? The Bran border couldn't be defended. They couldn't defend anything. I guess they did it on purpose to use us as a shield. This way, they could stop the barbarians and attack us at the same time. Killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Damn, that makes sense. It must be like this. I was wondering why the Bran soldiers were so crazy these days. They didn't care about the cost and stopped our advance. So this is what they were waiting for. They're so King ruthless. Careless. I didn't expect the barbarians. So unlucky. What did I say before? Don't attack the Sharon military route. Don't occupy this sensitive place. You didn't listen. What happened now? Shut up. What's the use of saying this now? Half a month ago. Did you expect this to happen? I didn't expect it, but if you listened to me then, there wouldn't be such a problem today. Childish. Go to your propaganda work. This is a King battlefield. Are you better at fighting than me? Our previous strategic plan was set in this area. There is no way to avoid it. It has nothing to do with occupying the Sharon military route. Rude. Barbaric. I don't know how to fight, but I have eyes. The barbarian army obviously came in through the Sharon military route. As long as we avoided it, they wouldn't have provoked us. T. What a joke. Discussions, curses, quarrels, and disheartened sighs could be heard. The normally dignified central tent was now, like a noisy market, a mess. Like most of the Bran people, the Gray Coat Army didn't expect the barbarians in the northern wilderness to be able to break through the border blockade that they couldn't break through for hundreds of years. Therefore, they didn't notice that the closest place to the front line was actually the 100,000 mountains where they were at. When the secret agency's personnel rushed to deliver the information in the morning, the central tent was already a mess. At first, They were shocked and in disbelief. Then, when all the high-ranking officers gathered, they began to discuss and quarrel. The barbarians. To be honest, the Greycoat army didn't know much about the barbarians. One of the few contacts they had was when they cooperated with the Bran. The Greycoat army had sent troops to the front line and fought with the Bran soldiers against the barbarians. But at that time, they were only supporting from the side. The main force against the barbarians was actually the Blank's army. This time, it was different. If there were no accidents, they would be the main force against the barbarians who had the most terrifying individual combat power on the continent. Their confidence was really not much. Chapter 980. In the main tent, the generals and high-ranking civilian officials were still in a mess. Some blamed each other, some argued until their faces turned red, and some sighed dejectedly. However, there was no decisive opinion. Those who could give a decisive opinion, such as Josiah, Fry, and the others, sat behind a tactical table and stared at the military map in front of them. They seemed to have no idea and were silent. This was a battlefield. This was a strange, complicated, and cruel battlefield of life and death. The previous day, the Greycoat army situation was still very good. They had the awe-inspiring power to sweep through thousands of troops like a tiger. Now, they were suddenly trapped in a region and a great disaster was imminent. No one could be blamed. Although the overall strategic plan was formulated by Fry, it was only passed after all the generals and high-ranking officials approved it. It was the same for occupying the main road in Sharon. As the leader, Josiah made the decision and then received the approval of most people. Blame Fry? Not really, because Fry was indeed the best candidate to replace the marshal in the Greycoat army. Blame Josiah? That was even more unlikely, because she did nothing wrong at all. Everything was decided by them. Now the problem was, who could they blame? Perhaps they could only blame themselves for not being as skilled as others. They could not see through the other party's intentions and stepped into the trap. After a moment, Fry, who was looking at the map, frowned. No one knew if it was because he couldn't think of a way to break out of the situation or because he was disturbed by the argument in the tent. Finally, he suddenly raised his head and shouted like rolling thunder. All of you, shut the F***CK up. The sky hasn't fallen. As soon as he shouted, the tent fell silent. The generals and high-ranking officials who were still arguing met Frey's gaze and couldn't help but look away and lower their heads. At this moment, let me ask a few questions. Josiah held his chin and his expression didn't change. It was as if he didn't hear the previous argument and Frey's angry shout. He looked at the military map and didn't raise his head. He said calmly, "If we choose to break out now and use the purple chamber cannon, how confident are we in leaving this place?" After a pause, the generals and officers looked at each other. They didn't know what Josiah meant and didn't dare to speak for a moment. In the end, Fred shook his head and replied, "If this is really a trap set up by the Bran, and we choose to break through, they will definitely suppress us like crazy. Even if we use the purple bore cannons, we don't have the confidence to defeat them in a short period of time." How long is a short time? Give me a definite time. Is it before the barbarians come here? Yes. Well, if we retreat the way we came, give up on the recently conquered areas, and retreat to the rear of Sharon's military base. No. Chief, we don't have enough time. The army might be able to, but the people in the cities and towns can't retreat. Many of the new recruits in the army are residents of these cities and towns. Their families and loved ones are all here, so they can't give up. One question and one answer, extremely fast. Josiah nodded in understanding. He raised his head, his expression as calm as water. "We can't retreat, and we can't advance. General Fry, what do you think we should do now?" Fry seemed to be making things difficult for Josiah, but he already knew what Josiah was thinking. He smiled and gently hammered the wooden table. He said firmly, "Then we can only fight. Are you confident?" "I don't know. We'll only know after we fight," Fry said calmly. At this time, the surrounding high-ranking officers also reacted. Yes, under the current situation, they couldn't avoid a direct battle with the barbarians. Therefore, instead of arguing and complaining here, it was more practical to think about how to fight with the barbarians. The reason was that simple. It was just that the high-ranking officers and high-ranking officers who had fallen into the trap couldn't face the reality for a while because of the terrifying strength of the barbarians. Now, with this question and answer, the truth was revealed. The atmosphere in the tent suddenly became lively. F***CK. Since we can't avoid it, then let's fight. F***CK. If I can fight with the barbarians, my career on the battlefield will be complete. Bah, do you still not talk? You're too F***king unlucky. Not only do we have to fight, we have to win. Not for anything else, but to shut the mouths of those bastards who say that our gray coat army only knows how to fight small battles and make money from the country's misfortune. These words are so heartening. Aren't they just barbarians? They also have 2 shoulders and a head. What's there to be afraid of? Count me in. Haha, you old man can forget about it. This is the duty of us soldiers. What's the use of including an old man like you? You can't even carry a sword. You want to scold the barbarians to death with your mouth. Oh no, the barbarians can't understand your scolding. Bullshit. When I went to the battlefield to kill the enemy, you were still playing with mud. Basically, they were uncultured, boorish men who had fought their way through the bloody battlefield. Once they put aside their worries, they immediately regained their bandit aura similar to that of a bandit leader. They rubbed their palms together and were crude and overbearing. Seeing this, Fry immediately took the opportunity to give orders. He gathered most of the purple bore cannons and organized troops in the army and moved them to the main military road of Sharon, ready to fight with the barbarians. As for Blank's army on the periphery, they wanted to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. They would not interfere with this battle. After all, whether it was the Northern Wilderness barbarians or the Gray Coat army, the loss of either one was the result they wanted. After most of the generals in the tent dispersed, Josiah, who had been silent and did not interfere with Frey's orders, suddenly said, "Later, I will lead the 2 armies to the east of the main military road of Sharon. Brother Fry, I'll leave this place to you. Please take care." Fry was stunned when he heard this. He immediately reacted and nodded. Understood. Leader, take care too. He did not say it clearly, but this was the only way out. The fighting power of the barbarians was too terrifying. This was not a situation that could be reversed with determination or slogans. Even if Josiah and the others were confident, or even if they were 90% sure, they did not dare to gamble with the possibility of failure. The reason was very simple. It was because they carried too many things on their shoulders. They could not afford to lose. The location of the main military road of Sharon was very awkward. It was right in the middle of the area occupied by the Gray Coat army. If it was occupied by the barbarians, the Gray Coat army would face the situation of being cut in half. This was a big taboo in military strategy. It was easy to be at a disadvantage. In addition, Blank's army was still watching covetously from the periphery. It was not impossible for them to be completely annihilated if things went wrong. Therefore, Josiah proposed to take the 2 armies to the other side of the main military road of Sharon. He wanted to divide the Gray Coat army into 2 groups. Just like the principle of not putting all eggs in the same basket. In this way, even if Frey's side or Josiah's side had problems, the Gray Coat army would not be in danger of being completely annihilated. There would be hope for a comeback. In the evening, Haita went up the mountain again and came to Wu Ding's small residence. "Master, there's news. This afternoon in East Star City, a group of people of unknown origin forced their way into the spatial magic tower in the city. They knocked out the guards and kidnapped a spatial magician who was guarding the tower. Then, they activated the long-distance teleportation array and quickly left. It should be them. They used the long-distance teleportation array as expected." Wu Ding nodded without surprise. His face full of age spots showed a slight smile. "Hee, this is the right move. It seems that Tang really cares about the Gray Coat army. No, he should be very concerned about the safety of that Josiah. Master, do you think he can succeed?" After successfully forcing Tang in to make a move, Haita was a little worried about the gains and losses. Of course, this was also normal. After all, it was a battlefield and facing an army. No matter how strong one was, it was hard to guarantee that there would not be any accidents. I don't know. Wu Ding shook his head and then said, but if Tangin can't succeed, it basically proves that this path is a dead end. There's no need to try again. After a pause, he continued, at that time, we can only wait for the brand to be destroyed. Or wait for the mysterious commander to reveal his whereabouts, and then let this old man go again. Haida was anxious. No, master, he waved his hand and interrupted. Don't say any more. I know my physical condition. I still have the strength to fight. Hee, don't be so sad. Everyone has to die, and I'm no exception. Moreover, you should think more positively. Instead of letting me linger on until I die, it's better to do something for the brand in the end. It's quite worth it, isn't it? If Tangin's weakness was Josiah and the Grey Coat Army, then Wu Ding's weakness was the Brand Empire. After guarding it for most of his life, he couldn't just sit and watch the empire collapse and do nothing. Haida lowered his head sadly. He knew that his master had made up his mind and couldn't be shaken. He could only hope that Tang could succeed. Then his master wouldn't have to go down the mountain to fight what was likely to be the last glorious battle. Well, I'm not dead yet. Don't be in such a hurry to show this face. Everyone was afraid of death, but people like Wu Ding, who had seen the prosperity of the world, could see these inevitable things and even joke about it without any taboo. After a pause, he said seriously, send a message to the military. Tell them that it's my order. Tell them to order the frontline legions to attack the barbarians in 3 days. I don't need to know about any losses or costs. I don't need to know about occasional victories. I just want them to keep mobilizing the barbarians so that Tang can find the mysterious commander who gave the orders. Understood. Also, before Tang succeeds or fails, tell the Blank's army that is surrounding the Grey Coat Army to behave. If anyone tries to take advantage of the situation, regardless of their military rank, they will be beheaded. Yes, from the south of the Brand to the north, it would take a few days or even a week to travel by boat at normal speed. If they travel by land, they would be able to reach the north 1 or 2 days earlier. Of course, it was also possible that they would never reach the north because there were so many bandits and thieves along the way. Tang didn't choose either of the two options. So, in less than a day, he successfully set foot on the northern land. He had to admit that the long-distance teleportation circle was really a good thing. Although it was expensive to build and there would be accidents from time to time, its speed was absolutely amazing. It could turn the horizon into a foot. Within a few breaths, one could reach a place that was thousands of miles away. Of course, this was also thanks to the huge investment that the brand had made in this area. Not all cities had long-distance teleportation circles. Generally, only large cities with particularly developed politics and economies had them. Oh, there were also some special circumstances. For example, when the Grey Coat Army and the Brand first cooperated, the Brand set up a long-distance teleportation circle in a city near the 100,000 Mountains in order to ensure that the communication between the two sides was smooth. It was still evening in the city of Sabah, the first big city that Tang stopped at in the north. The light dissipated, and what appeared in front of him was a closed, arched building. The surrounding walls were engraved with all kinds of mysterious patterns, looking distant and mysterious, just like the feeling of a spatial mage. On each of the 4 sides of the wall, there was a huge illuminating crystal, illuminating the place as bright as day. Looking down, on the ground under his feet was a spatial magic circle built with countless crisscrossing lines. It was easy to catch glimpses of flashing light in it, disappearing in a flash. This was the long-distance teleportation circle. This was the spatial magic tower. All the cities that had teleportation circles all over the country had built them in a very similar way. It gave the feeling that one had never moved from one place, when in fact, one had traveled thousands of miles and successfully reached their destination. Good evening, gentlemen. Please come over and register. Not far from the magic circle, near the door, sat a middle-aged mage in a robe. He looked over and spoke with a polite smile on his face. As for the so-called registration, it was, of course, to register one's identity. The long-distance teleportation circle was not a cheap thing that anyone could use. It was an expensive means of transportation that was more luxurious than luxury goods. The cost of each teleportation was enormous. Except for the royal family and some very special people, the great nobles had to pay if they wanted to use it, and the average noble family couldn't afford it. Of course, the payment was before the teleportation. Registering one's identity now was because they were worried that this unique way of traveling thousands of miles in an instant would become a tool for spies, wanted criminals, and so on to escape, so they had to confirm their identity. Tang In, who walked out of the teleportation circle, ignored them and went straight to the dozen or so young men beside him. After you go out, find a secret agency and pass a message to Josiah and the others. Tell them to hold on. I'll take care of this. If they really can't hold on, and I'm not back by then, let them make their own plans. She knows what to do. Sir, you need to come over and register your identity. Practice the energy circulation channel I gave you before. It's good for you. The rest is in David's hands. The assassin organization can continue. David is in the light, and Michaud is in the dark, but must be headed by Josiah. This is my order. Of course, if you don't want to do it, you could discuss this among yourselves. Boss, no need to say anything. I know that time is tight. Just listen to me. Remember, the most important thing is if I don't come back for a long time, and there is no news. Don't worry, just in case I won't die so easily. Maybe I'm delayed by something. Well, don't inquire about me, and don't have any other ideas. Especially, keep an eye on little Carol. That girl can do anything when she's hot-headed. And, finally, just wait for me to come back. Sir, the middle-aged mage frowned and stood up, looking unhappy. He believed that if he didn't know that the people who could take the long-distance transmission circle were not ordinary people, he wouldn't have called him sir. It was a pity that he didn't see the bitter face of the space mage standing behind Tang. Otherwise, he might have been able to see something. That's it, dismissed. Waving his hand, Tang turned around and walked to the registration table with his arm around the space mage's shoulder. He didn't take the quill from the middle-aged mage and asked calmly, "Where is the space crystal?" The space crystal was a necessity to start the transmission circle. You want to teleport? Wait, we'll let you go out without permission. Don't you know the rules? Register before you go. Looking at the dozen young people who turned a deaf ear to him and quickly walked to the door, the middle-aged mage suddenly became anxious and raised his magic staff. Pa! A trace of imperceptible light flashed past, and the magic staff that had just been raised was cut in two. The lower part was held tightly in the middle-aged mage's hand, but the magic staff wrapped in the magic crystal fell and hit the registration table. Frowning, he reached out and grabbed the middle-aged mage's lapel. Where is the space crystal? I have a bad temper. Don't make me repeat this question again. You? Which family are you from? How dare you? Don't you know the rules? The space crystal must. Following the middle-aged mage's subconscious glance at the small door on the right, Tang In got the answer. He released his hand and walked directly. Damn it, you don't have the right. Boom! A strong wind swept past, and the arched wall trembled. The middle-aged mage's body was completely immersed in the mural. Now there is a moment later, Tang In and the trembling space mage walked out of the small room with a few pieces of colorless transparent crystals. Coming to the side of the magic array, they bent down and put the crystals one by one into the grooves of the magic array. Suddenly, rays of light flowed out like water, quickly covering every line of the magic array. Standing in the middle of the magic array, Tang turned his head and asked calmly, "Do you still remember what I said before?" "Yes, remember. You invited me to be your driver. Don't have any crooked thoughts. Don't play tricks. If you're safe, I'm safe. Very good. Don't be nervous, my promise still stands. Where's the next stop?" It seems to be the transmission array in the north of the temple. The location is in a hidden cave very close to the Holy Light City. Oh, it's the Northern Temple headquarters. I'm familiar with that place. Let's go. Yes. Waving his staff, a dazzling light instantly shot up to the sky, covering the two figures in the magic array. By the time the light dissipated, the array was already empty. A moment later, with a thud, the middle-aged mage peeled off the wall and fell straight to the ground. The transmission array in the north of the temple. In the cave, it was still in the arched architectural style. However, unlike Sabah City, there was more than one space magician in Sabah City. There were also nearly 100 high-level knights in holy armor, as well as priests and mages with staffs in their hands, filling up the cave. There was a faint noise outside the cave, as if there were many people outside, waiting in a long line as if they were going somewhere together. The space mage in charge of the transmission was instructing the knights to install the space crystal. He counted the number of people in the cave, turned his head and shouted, "Quick, quick! A few more people come in, teleport all at once." Chapter 981. The cave was bustling with activity. Whoa! Head Commander Khandra is leading the team, and even the mages from the temple are here. Where are we going? Screen Mountain City, don't you know? Screen Mountain City, the city near the front line? Are we going to the battlefield to fight with the barbarians? Of course not. We are not the only ones going to the battlefield. Haven't you heard? Just recently, those Puritans are establishing a new religion near Screen Mountain City, he exclaimed. Establishing a new religion. Damn it. Lower your voice. This is a taboo in the temple. You can't talk about it. I only heard about it from the discussions of the bishops when I was patrolling outside the main hall. Sorry. Is this true? You can't believe it, right? I was the same when I first heard about it. But look at the situation now. They're setting off in such a big way, and they even used a long-distance teleportation circle. It would be a miracle if they are not going to Screen Mountain City. Sigh, what a pity. I thought Lady Sylvia and the others betraying the temple was just a misunderstanding, and they would soon be cleared and returned to the temple. But now it seems establishing a new religion is treacherous. They're going to fight the temple to the death. F***CK, this kind of thing, quiet. Lord Khandra is here. Secrets were indeed unreliable. This knight said it was a taboo in the temple, but discussions like this were already spreading around the cave. It wasn't until a burly, stocky man with a full beard walked into the cave that they quickly quieted down and gradually stopped hearing about it. He walked in front of the space mage. "How is it? Can we go now?" "No problem, Sir Knight." "Then let's go." The head commander, named Khandra, nodded and waved his hand. As soon as he finished speaking, before the space magician could arrange for everyone to enter the teleportation array one by one, the teleportation array on the high platform suddenly released a dazzling light. Khandra was stunned and subconsciously turned to look at the space sorcerer, who was also stunned. "What's going on? Someone is teleporting here. Strange, this is the temple's exclusive magic circle. Spatial mages everywhere should know that they can't come here casually. Could it be a mistake? Did they go the wrong way? How could this space magician know that his fellow magician wasn't making a mistake, but rather he couldn't help himself? Tang In wanted to rush to the front line in the north in the shortest time possible. Naturally, he would take the shortest route possible, so he didn't care about these established rules. When the light dissipated, Tang In and the unlucky space magician stood side by side on the high platform. As he swept his gaze across the room, he was stunned. If it weren't for the fact that the knights and mages around the high platform were also in a daze, Tang would have really thought that the spatial magician beside him had played tricks and led him into the ambush. "Who are you? Where did it come from?" The space magician raised his head and looked over. His expression was slightly gloomy as he questioned rudely. "Don't you know that you can't casually enter this place? Ordinary mages might be afraid of those who could use the teleportation portal at will, but the people of the Temple of Light certainly would not." They were full of confidence. After making a clear judgment of the situation, they were sure that it wasn't a trap. Tang didn't have time to care about why so many clergymen were gathered here. He looked at the space magician below the high platform and asked calmly, "Where's the space crystal?" After a pause, he glanced at something out of the corner of his eye. He subconsciously looked around and found that the groove of the portal had been filled with space crystals. He couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, and then he was delighted. "Looks like I'm in luck. Thanks." Nodding at Chandra and the others below the platform, who had a puzzled look on their faces, Tang turned around and said, "Let's go." "Okay." Raising his staff, the space magician agreed without hesitation. This was not a good place. When he came here, he was worried that Tang In would snatch the space crystal again. He wasn't worried about Tang In's safety. Along the way, he was well aware of how terrifying the person beside him was. He was just worried about himself. After all, no matter how you looked at it, they were now on the same side, and the Temple of Light was not someone to be trifled with, however. This space magician didn't know that their behavior of taking advantage of the situation as if there was no one else around was what angered the other party the most. "Stop. Damn it." Seeing this, the temple magician below the platform was instantly furious. How could he have thought that the expensive space crystals here would be a wedding dress for the other party? By the time he came back to his senses, streams of light had already flowed out from the grooves of the crystals, quickly covering the crisscrossing lines of the portal. It was obvious that the portal had been activated. No matter the result, this batch of space crystals was considered useless. Chandra, who had also come back to his senses, was furious when he saw this. However, his reaction was even more straightforward. With a roar, he took a step and leaped, swinging his spear in the air, whistling like the shadow of a whip. "Get down here." The activation of the portal was quite fast, but after all, it wasn't a simple, instantaneous spell. It still needed a few breaths of time to buffer, and a few breaths of time was enough for an expert like Chandra. He wanted to beat down these two daring fellows before the portal was activated. The staff paused, and the long spear swept out horizontally. The space magician subconsciously wanted to dodge. However, in the next moment, an indifferent voice was heard beside his ear. "Do your thing." Immediately, bang, bang, bang. Dense collisions, and the air exploded. The shadow of the whip-like spear that was about to hit him instantly disappeared before his eyes. At the same time, Chandra, who had leaped in the air, was like a wild rabbit that had encountered a fierce tiger. He quickly retreated, frantically blocking, and cried out in alarm. Attack, defense, attack, retreat, attack, attack. Unknowingly, figures appeared around Chandra, like ghosts, following him like shadows. "Sorry, I'm in a hurry." Spear disarming, elbow strikes, knee strikes, fingers turn into knives, sharp slashes. In an instant, a series of dazzling attacks pressed down on Chandra like a storm, tyrannically dismembering and destroying his barely parried defense. "Sir!" A belated warning roar came, and the knights and mages below finally reacted. Their expressions changed greatly, and they wanted to help, but looking at the rolling and tangled battle in front of them, their scalps were numb, and they could not keep up with it, let alone intervene. In a moment of hesitation, the long spear was sent flying by a clean hand knife. Chandra's defense was completely broken, and his center was wide open. Very close. "So it's better for you to scram." The ghostly figures flashed crazily around Chandra's body, and countless blade lights, horizontally, vertically, and diagonally, burst out in an instant like a flood. Arms, chest, lower abdomen, thighs. Every time a blade light was swung out, a wound would be drawn from somewhere on Chandra's body. Blood splattered everywhere, wantonly sprinkling in just a few breaths of time, in just a few dozen feet in the air. Chandra, one of the 12 knight commanders of the Temple of Light, went from attacking to parrying to retreating awkwardly, and finally, he was at the mercy of others. Boom! Crash! There was a violent explosion in the air, and strong winds were everywhere. The illuminating crystals on the surrounding walls of the cave suddenly exploded, shattering into glass that filled the sky. In the flickering light, Chandra's body, with blood splattering everywhere, flew out like a broken water bag and landed heavily on the rocks of the cave. Twain, on the other hand, revealed his face clearly for the first time during this intense battle that caused others to be unable to catch their breath. He was calm and indifferent, his hands spread out wide, and the corners of his black clothes fluttered coldly. Like a night bat, he flew back into the dazzling light on the high platform and disappeared. Buzz, the soft sound was heard, and a bright light was released. The long-distance teleportation circle was activated. The cave was dead silent. After a moment, everyone opened their mouths and stared blankly at the empty magic circle on the high platform. They then turned their heads stiffly and looked at Head Commander Khandra, who was still deep in the cave wall, unconscious. They could only see his chest moving up and down slightly. They swallowed hard. Gulp! Immediately, it was a mess. Master, damn it. Go after him. Save Master first. Priest. Where the F Astra CK is the priest, come quickly. You guys, don't you think that person just now looked familiar? Ping Shan City, the teleportation tower. The light faded, and Tang In and his figure appeared on the mysterious magic circle again. That unlucky space magician seemed to have not recovered from the scene a few breaths ago. His face was filled with fear. Tang In was still expressionless, as if he did not realize what he had just done and what kind of consequences it would cause. Of course, maybe he did not care. Looking around, the dome of the tower, the abstract paintings, the huge, illuminating crystals, it was still the same decoration style. But the space magician who was in charge of this place was nowhere to be seen, and there was no one in sight. This is the last stop? We can't teleport any further? Yes, sir. The space magician replied very carefully. Then, as if he was afraid that the answer would not satisfy Tang In, he added, if it was a normal time, and the application was approved by the military, we could still go forward to the city near the front line. But now that the northern wilderness is invading, they have unilaterally shut down the teleportation portal. So, previously, the space magician was still thinking about how to get back at them after this. But after seeing the scene of the teleportation portal in the north of the temple, now he only hoped that the other party would keep their promise and let him leave safely. If it was not because of the problem of strength, that would be fine. The point was that this crazy act of offending the Temple of Light was not something a normal person would do. He nodded, indicating that he understood the answer. After all, in wartime, things like long-distance teleportation portals were not very safe. Stepping out of the teleportation portal, Tang In thought for a while and asked, how far is it from here to the front line? It's quite far. There's still some distance. If you ride a horse without sleep or rest, it will take at least a day and a night. The space magician answered the question very cooperatively. Now, the space magician was completely unreserved in telling him everything he knew. Tang In could not help but frown when he heard that. Then, he relaxed and nodded slightly to express his gratitude. Thank you, you can go now. Thank you. The space magician was overjoyed when he heard this. He bowed and thanked him in return, and then walked quickly to the door without looking back. In fact, with his identity as a space magician, if he wanted to leave here quickly now, it was undoubtedly more convenient and faster to take the long-distance teleportation portal to another city. But he was afraid of leaving a record of his whereabouts, and the temple would find him, so he naturally did not dare to do so. But just as the space magician was approaching the door, suddenly his shoulder was forcibly pressed down by a palm. Wait a minute. The space magician turned his head and saw Tang In's slightly gloomy expression. He could not help but be frightened, thinking that the other party was going back on his word. He said in a trembling voice, You said that you would let me leave safely. Before he finished speaking, his vision suddenly blurred, and his body was thrown backward by a powerful force. He could not help but cry out involuntarily. In fact, if the space magician did not look back, he would have discovered that when he was thrown backward by Tang In, a long spear suddenly pierced from the side of the door with the force of thunder. Ding! After swinging his dagger sideways and blocking the long spear, Tang In's face was cold, and his anger was overflowing. You're courting death. He was already in a bad mood, and after being attacked again and again, Tang In finally flew into a rage. He did not care who the sneak attacker behind the door was. He stepped forward and stretched out his hand, accurately grabbing the body of the spear and pulling it fiercely. Boom! An armored figure smashed the door and fell in. Before he could stabilize his body, a strange demonic blade flashed in front of his eyes and pierced through the gap in the armor. He immediately felt a chill all over his body and closed his eyes in despair. At this moment, Tang, have mercy! The shadows outside the door swayed, and it seemed that there were many people lying in ambush here. One of them seemed to recognize Tang Yin, who was not disguised, and immediately exclaimed to dissuade him. With Tang Yin's speed, by the time he finished shouting, he would have stabbed more than 100 times. Fortunately, that person called out Tang Yin's name first, and only then did the dagger stop close to his throat. Frowning, he looked up. It was evening now, and the light outside the door was dim. Tang Yin narrowed his eyes, and only then did he recognize the figure rushing over from the crowd, waving his hand. Owens? The person who rushed over was Owens, who had met Tang in a few times. He was also one of the 12 knight commanders of the temple. Of course, his current identity was the same as Sylvia's, a traitor of the temple. Approaching, looking at the pale-faced and panting knight after Tang Yin withdrew his dagger, Owens let out a long sigh of relief and held the other party's shoulder. Phew! Fortunately, you're panting. Fortunately, I have sharp eyes, and you're lucky to have escaped with your life. Someone, help him to the back to calm down. Saying so, he looked at the space magician who was still in shock, and then turned his eyes to Tang Yin. He smiled and nodded. Thank you. I owe you another one. Tang Yin did not care where the word again came from. He glanced at the hundreds of figures behind Owens, including the original Knights of Light and the original Temple Magicians. He frowned. What are you doing here? The relationship between Tang Yin and Owens was just so. They could even be said to be enemies. The few times they met before, they were almost always in battle. If it were not for Sylvia, he would have already killed his way out. Owens was a little embarrassed. Well, I think you've heard that we're no longer part of the Temple of Light. We've started a new sect. Look, the Temple of Light was worried when they heard about it. According to the information we got, they were preparing to send people to encircle us by long-distance teleportation. So we ambushed here in advance. Ahem, who would have thought that you would come at this time? Misunderstanding, it's all a misunderstanding. When Twain heard this, he immediately recalled the scene he saw in the temple's teleportation portal and nodded in agreement. Then he realized something and raised his eyebrows. New sect. Sylvia is here? It had been more than 2 months since they parted at the small hotel in the south. However, Tang Yin still clearly remembered the plan Sylvia said before she left. She wanted to unite the besieged Puritans to establish a new sect and restore the faith of light. Now it seemed that she had succeeded. However, the future of the new sect was not very bright. They had come to this place close to the border, but the Temple of Light was still concerned about them. She's outside the city. She's organizing everyone to move. If you want to see her, I can send someone. Owens was very clear that it was Tang Yin who saved Sylvia in the south. He also vaguely knew the relationship between the two. Now that he saw that Tang Yin, who was obviously in a hurry, still remembered to mention Sylvia, he was undoubtedly certain of his guess. Thinking that Sylvia was always in a daze behind people recently, as if she was in a trance recalling something, Owens immediately decided to help his friend. But, forget it. After a moment of silence, Tang Yin shook his head. I'm in a hurry this time, so I won't go. Help me pass a message. Ask her to take care. Yes, that's it. Owens opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he didn't say anything. Finally, he nodded and said, well, although I still think it's better if you say it yourself, but, well, I promise you. Thank you. Tang Yin nodded and said seriously, I need a horse now. That's easy. There's some outside. You can choose whatever you want. I won't thank you this time, but I'll tell you a piece of information in exchange. Tang Yin looked up at the people outside the door again and said, I don't know if you're lying in ambush here because you want to strike at the vanguard of the temple and dampen their spirit. But there's something wrong with your information. I just came over from the teleportation portal of the temple, and the other side has a lot of people, several times more than you, and their strength is not bad. So, without waiting for Owens to finish, his expression changed greatly, and he suddenly jumped up. He pointed to the teleportation portal in the tower and shouted anxiously, "Quick! There's a change in the plan. Immediately close this teleportation portal. No, destroy it. Quick, quick, quick!" Seeing that Owens had reacted, Tangan didn't say anything more. He nodded, flashed around the crowd, and instantly disappeared into the boundless night. After a while, Owens, who had withdrawn from the city, caught up with Sylvia, who was leading a group of original clergymen. "Hey, you're back so soon? How is it? Did the ambush go smoothly?" "There was a small problem. The plan was canceled at the last minute." "Well, I just saw Tang in." The warhorse suddenly raised its head and neighed, anxiously stomping its hooves. The reins around its neck instantly tightened, making it breathless. Fortunately, Sylvia's riding skills were good, and she wasn't overturned. She immediately let go of the reins and stroked the warhorse under her to comfort it. She looked up with a calm expression and looked at Owens, who had a playful smile on his face. There was a slight tremor in her voice that was difficult to detect. "What did he say?" "Nothing much. He still remembers me. We just chatted about the weather in the north, food, and so on." Why did you take out a gun?" "Oh, I remember now. He told you to take care of yourself." "That's it." Sylvia pursed her lips, her eyes dimmed, and her hand that was holding the reins unconsciously clenched into a fist. "Huh, I'm just teasing you, of course it's not that. But are you sure you wanted to say?" "Well," he said, "he misses you a little." Pausing, Owens looked at Sylvia's eyes that were suddenly filled with doubt and some other things, and spread his hands calmly. "Hey, you asked me to say it. What's with that look in your eyes? You're not going to kill me, are you?" "You can't be. I'll keep it a secret. Really. We've been friends for so many years, you have to believe me." "Ah, thanks." "Thank you. Why are you being so formal? You're making me a little embarrassed." Chapter 982. 2 days later, in the afternoon of the Zechen Legion's war zone, the fierce battle was coming to an end. Other than the occasional screams and curses, the small city was completely quiet. Only the black smoke that was still rising in spirals from various parts of the city drifted in the biting cold wind, with nowhere to hide. The city gate, the walls, the streets. Blood was everywhere. Corpses that had not completely cooled down could be seen everywhere inside and outside the city. There were Zechen Legion soldiers wearing standard armor, northern wilderness barbarians with thick body hair, and occasionally a few commoners in ordinary clothes. However, judging from the barbarian silhouettes that were wandering around the battlefield, this tragic battle for the town had obviously ended in the victory of the barbarians. Although there were still a few sporadic battles in the city, the battle was undoubtedly over. The barbarians at the city gate were already cleaning up the battlefield. Their method was simple and crude. They directly took off the armor and weapons of the Brand Legion soldiers and piled them aside. Then, after a rough search, they threw the corpses into a big hole and buried them together if they did not find anything. If they found money, provisions, and other spoils of war, they would laugh and stuff it into their pockets without hesitation. Then they would continue to throw the corpses into the big hole, disrespecting the opponent. Stop joking around. Have you ever seen a wild beast bury its prey's bones after eating it? This was the barbarians' way of doing things. They did not hold any grand burials. Even if they found the corpses of their own people, they would search them and throw them into another big hole to bury them together. Soon, the city gate was mostly cleaned up. The large group of people waiting outside the city moved slowly and passed through the broken city, gate one after another. The barbarian general laughed heartily. "Ha! Now that we have lost this city, the Zechen Legion's momentum is gone. Next, it's time for us to reap the rewards." The importance of a strategic location was not dependent on the size of the city. It was determined by its geographical location. Sometimes, even an inconspicuous checkpoint was more important than a large city. From the perspective of the barbarian general who was laughing, occupying this small city was undoubtedly an extremely important part of their strategy. That's right. Take over this brand town. The Zechen defense zone in the rear, which has almost no strategic places to defend, is the boundless grassland where the brave warriors of the northern wilderness can roam freely. We're finally here. Mother Asterisker, in the past, with that damned Z in charge, we could only look at this place enviously from the map. Now, we can finally set foot on this land. Ha. Ha ha. Z is nothing. Even if Z didn't die, he still wouldn't be able to stop His Highness' divine strategy. That's right. That Z should be glad that he died early. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such a great reputation if he met our Highness. He watched with his own eyes as his army advanced step by step to an important position that the tribe had not occupied for more than 100 years. It was also the war zone where the Zechen Legion was stationed. The barbarian generals were naturally overjoyed. They were so excited that even Z, who had died a year ago, was dragged out to talk about this matter. Their words were filled with contempt. That's enough, uncles. If you continue to praise him like this, I don't know what to say anymore. Lon Shah, who was in the middle of the crowd, pushed up the glasses on the bridge of his nose. He looked a little helpless. Moreover, although that Z was from Bran, he was indeed a prodigy on the battlefield. Although it's a pity that I didn't have the chance to face him personally, if we really met on the battlefield, I really don't have much confidence. Haha, your Highness is too modest. Just like how the people of the Bran worship Z, the barbarian generals who had followed Lon Shah all the way to victory almost unconditionally trusted this new commander who had just taken office not long ago. Now that they heard Lon Shah say something that praised others, they naturally didn't believe it. They just thought that he was being polite and modest. And Lon Shah, who had seen many reports of Z's commanding battles, of course knew that the title of God of War was well-deserved. But now that all the generals were praising him, he didn't want to disregard their wishes. He thought for a moment and changed the topic with a smile. Haha, let's not talk about this. The Zechen Legion's fighting strength is amazing. As long as it hasn't been completely defeated, everything is unknown. Well, I heard that my brother's side had officially broken through the blockade of the Thunderbolt's army a few days ago. Now, they should have invaded the hinterland of the Bran, right? That's really amazing. Prince Tiu, well, there is such news. He's just relying on our remaining strength to take advantage of the situation. Haha, you can't say that. Prince Tiu still has some real skills. When mentioning Tiu, the barbarian generals immediately restrained their excitement. They were a little afraid. Even if there were some who were dissatisfied, they were quickly covered up by others. But this was just on the surface. They treated it as their respect for the royal family. They didn't care much about Tiu himself, and even somewhat disdained him. The actual situation was more or less like this. To be honest, Tiu really had the ability to fight. Previously, he had been by the side of the former chief of the tribe for many years. Under the influence of what he had heard, his commanding skills were also very good. But this depended on who he was compared to. If he was compared to Lon Shah, who had just obtained the commander's seal, there was no doubt that the difference was obvious. For example, in the current invasion war, Lon Shah commanded the Zechen Legion and Tsangyen Legion to attack. They advanced side by side like a hot knife through butter. It could be said that it was very impressive. Especially the Zechen Legion, which was personally commanded, was the benchmark of all the previous battlefronts. There was no one else who had the advantage of being in the limelight. The Thunder Legion, which was commanded by Tiu, was also fighting well, but it was only so. The reason why they were able to follow closely behind the other two battlefronts was because they had secretly borrowed the power of Lon Shah's side. After all, if the Zechen Legion fell, the Thunder Legion, which was on the right, wouldn't have lost its battle line. But in order to prevent the barbarians from surrounding Zechen Legion, they would have to abandon their battle line and retreat. However, it must be said that Tiu's luck was good. Originally, he had been advancing with Lon Shah's side, but he had used some unknown method to break through the blockade of the Thunderbolt's army a few days ago. Then, he had broken into the hinterland of the Bran and snatched the first credit. This made the old barbarian generals who followed Lon Shah feel very unconvinced. They thought that the other side had taken advantage of them. Lansha obviously understood the underlying meaning of these people's words. She also knew that they were feeling indignant for her. But she didn't say anything. She didn't care much about snatching the first credit. Especially, she knew that Tiu's brother, who had been very good to her in the past, was secretly hostile towards her after the rumor of the mystery of his birth was spread. So, she had the intention to give in and help him. The generals didn't know Lan Sha's intention. They only knew that Tiu was most likely the son of the Northern Wilderness Empress and Z. He wasn't a real person from the Northern Wilderness. So, it was impossible for him to inherit the throne of the royal family. So, they naturally didn't think highly of him. Instead, they were close to the only one who had the qualifications to inherit the throne, His Highness Lan Sha. His Highness Tiu certainly has some real skills. But he has met a tough bone this time. It'll be difficult for him to break into the hinterland of the Northern Wilderness. Oh, what do you mean? The generals were stunned when they heard this. Lan Sha also looked at the middle-aged officer who spoke with a puzzled expression. I just heard the news not long ago. I have a cousin who is working under His Highness Tiu. Well, I wonder if anyone has heard of the Grey Coat Army? Grey Coat Army? What army is that? Does the Bran Army have this flag? I don't know. I haven't heard of it. The Northern Wilderness hadn't really broken into the hinterland of the Bran for hundreds of years. Naturally, these generals wouldn't have heard of the Grey Coat Army. When they heard this, they looked at each other with a puzzled expression. Only Lan Sha frowned slightly. After thinking for a while, he said, "Is it the civilian army formed by the ordinary Bran people who couldn't stand the oppression and rebelled against the Bran Empire? Your Highness is really knowledgeable. It really is the civilian army of the Bran." The middle-aged barbarian officer was stunned when he heard this. Then, he couldn't help but praise. "I've only heard about it occasionally. The intelligence collected before the war mentioned this special army of the Bran Empire." "Well, you can continue," Lan Sha said casually as he waved his hand casually. It was as if he really had only seen it occasionally. Andre, who was guarding at the side, had a strange expression on his face when he heard this. He was considered one of Lan Sha's men. His fiancée was Lan Sha's personal maid. Lan Sha didn't mean to avoid him. So, he naturally knew that for a period of time, Lan Sha had secretly sent a secret order to the spies hidden in the Bran Empire to find out about a Bran man named Arthur. According to the spies' report, Arthur's wanted portrait had been hung all over the Bran. However, there wasn't much information about him. They only knew that he was a member of the Grey Coat Army. At the same time, they also sent back some information about the Grey Coat Army. Of course, they also knew that Arthur was actually a pseudonym. His real name was Tang Yin. Because of this, Andre found that Lan Sha was in a bad mood these days. He kept muttering liars, liars, and so on. The middle-aged officer continued. After His Highness Tiu broke through the Thunderbolts army's blockade, he didn't encounter the Blanks army. Instead, he just happened to run into this Grey Coat Army. At first, His Highness Tiu didn't pay attention to this civilian army, because it was said that the other party didn't even have standard armor. Their weapons were also a variety of weapons. It was obvious that they were a mixed army. But when they really fought, His Highness Tiu's side suffered a big loss. How could that be? Impossible. Even the Bran's regular army couldn't withstand the attack of our tribal warriors. This mixed army, could it be that His Highness Tiu made a mistake in his command due to carelessness? No, none of them. Just as the generals were stunned and could not help but open their mouths to question and guess, the middle-aged military officer waved his hand and denied it. Then, he seemed to have thought of something, and his expression was somewhat puzzled and emotional. "Do you still remember the strange weapon that damn Z used to break into my tribe's imperial city? This Grey Coat Army has a lot of them." Of course, it wasn't only these weapons that caused His Highness Tiu's army to suffer a big loss, but also those Bran civilian soldiers. He paused, and his expression became more complicated. "I didn't see the battle with my own eyes, but according to my cousin, this Blank's army is very, very special. Once they entered the charging state and the two sides engaged in close combat, They didn't fear the terrifying individual combat ability of our tribal warriors at all. Even if there was only one person left, they dared to wildly swing their swords at our warriors. If they had weapons, they would use weapons to chop. If they didn't, they would use their fists to smash. If their fists were chopped, they would bite with their teeth. If their legs were chopped, they would roll down the ravine with our warriors and die together. As long as they were still breathing, as long as they didn't close their eyes, they won't stop attacking. They will never stop. Everyone is like this. Phew. My cousin said in the letter that when he was commanding the warriors under his command to attack a mountain, he saw with his own eyes that the warriors who didn't know what fear was were actually beaten back 3 times by the enemy. 3 times. The enemy is too crazy, too crazy. They were even crazier and more bloodthirsty than the warriors of our tribe on the battlefield. Licking his dry lips, the middle-aged officer looked at the generals who were stunned and stopped at the gate. He spread out his hands and said, "Doesn't it sound unbelievable? To be honest, I didn't believe it when I first saw it. If I didn't know my cousin's character, I wouldn't believe that the hypocritical brand people who only like to play tricks would be so brave and crazy. I would rather believe that it was just a joke and that my cousin was deliberately teasing me. Although it's unlikely to happen, but it should be true." The cold wind was as sharp as a knife. It passed through the tunnel of the city gate and made a whistling sound. It sounded like the mournful howling of ghosts. The barbarian generals had never been afraid of the cold because of their exuberant body hair. But they shivered when they heard the cold wind. They thought about the scene that the middle-aged officer had just described and felt a chill in their hearts. They were the barbarian generals. So they were very clear about the characteristics of the warriors under their command. To put it bluntly, an ordinary warrior's brain was indeed very simple. It could even be said that they were stupid and couldn't think straight. But it was also because of these characteristics that they were fearless on the battlefield. They were like wild beasts. Even if they knew that the bombardment zone of the brand's heavy weapon was in front of them, they would still dare to roar and rush forward without fear of death. But the brand people, or it could be said that a person with a normal IQ wouldn't be able to do this. It was because their brain was always working at any time and place. Maybe it wasn't because they were afraid of death. Instead, they were thinking about how to kill the enemy in front of them. But it was also because of these thoughts that they couldn't follow their emotions and instinct to kill on the battlefield. It was even more impossible for them to do the crazy thing of cutting off the enemy's head and drinking their blood in a ferocious manner. It was hard to say which of these two states was better or worse on the battlefield. But one thing was for sure. In terms of craziness, the simple-minded warriors of the barbarian tribes were undoubtedly better. But now, this middle-aged officer was saying that the brand civilian army was crazier, and more bloodthirsty than the warriors of the barbarian tribes. How could it be? How could they overcome the unnecessary thoughts in their minds? How could they suppress the fear of death in their hearts? How could they turn themselves into wild beasts? What right do they have to do this? If there were a soldier of the Gray Coat Army here, he would certainly hold his head high and proudly tell these barbarian generals that they relied on the faith in their hearts. This faith didn't come from the gods, but from themselves. Or, to be more precise, it was because they were ambitious. They had the ambition to use their hands to build a stable home for their wives and children. They had the ambition to use their weapons to carve out a bloody path in this world of cannibalism. They had the ambition to use their hot blood to overthrow this ugly empire that was rotten to the core. What do the poor have? Nothing. What do the poor need? Ambition. Ambition. It was ambition. Unfortunately, there weren't any soldiers of the Gray Coat Army here. So, these barbarian generals were destined to be in a daze. They didn't know why this mixed army was crazier than their warriors. Gray Coat Army. Interesting. No wonder. Compared to the shocked barbarian generals, Lanshaw's expression was much calmer. Perhaps he already knew that this civilian army wasn't simple, so he only muttered to himself thoughtfully. He raised his head and looked at the confused gazes of the generals. He thought for a while and explained, "When I heard that my brother had broken through the blockade line of the Thunderbolt's army a few days ago, I had a hunch that something was wrong. But after studying the topographic map and combining the collected information, I still couldn't find any clues. So I didn't think too much about it and just thought that I was overthinking. But now it seems that Lansha spread his hands and said helplessly, "This should be a trap set up by the brand. Their goal is to sit on top of the mountain and watch the tigers fight. They want to see my brother's army and the gray coat army kill each other." The middle-aged officer couldn't help but gasp when he heard this. His expression changed. That must be it. No wonder His Highness Tiu met the gray coat army as soon as he tore open a gap. How can there be such a coincidence? Damn it, those treacherous brand people. I was wondering how His Highness Tiu could reach the heart of the brand so easily. It turns out that he was used as a tool by the brand people. Then, should we send someone to inform His Highness Tiu? Don't think about it. You know His Highness Tiu's character. It will be fine if he didn't suffer any losses. But now that he has suffered a huge loss, even if we send someone to inform him and he knows that this is a trap, he won't retreat easily. That's true. Someone come. Looking at the officers who were gloating and making sarcastic remarks, Lansha frowned slightly. Her expression darkened, and she raised her head to call Andre, who was standing at the side. "Did you hear what we said just now?" "Okay. Immediately send someone to inform His Highness Tiu. Tell him not to get entangled with the Gray Coat Army. Bypass their territory and enter the heart of the brand is the proper thing to do." Yes. Although he guessed that Tiu probably wouldn't care about Lansha's opinion, Andre simply nodded and agreed. "Wait." Calling out to Andre, Lansha said again, "Don't say that this is my opinion. Yes, just say that it's Elder Tai's suggestion." Elder Tai was also a high-ranking barbarian general, but he was now fighting in the Tsangyan war zone. Of course, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that this person had a good relationship with Tiu. Obviously, Lansha also realized the problem. If Tiu knew that this idea was given by her, he would most likely do the opposite and attack the Gray Coat Army even more. Seeing that Lansha was determined to help Tiu, the surrounding barbarian officers suddenly felt a little awkward. They didn't say anything good just now. Just when the atmosphere was getting cold, a burly barbarian man ran from the front with sweat all over his forehead. He didn't even have time to catch his breath before he hurriedly shouted, "General, there's an urgent report from the front. Several Zichan troops have launched a large-scale counterattack and are approaching the front line." Humph. What did you say? Counterattack? How is that possible? Has the brand collectively gone crazy? Chapter 983. North at the front line. No way. Are we really going to fight? What are they doing? Fighting in the wild with those barbarians? Did their brains get squeezed by a door? What kind of stupid move is this? Isn't it obvious that they want us to die? That's enough. All of you shut up. Our superiors have their own reasons for doing things. Soldiers like us just need to follow orders. What's with all this nonsense? In the middle of the barren mountain range, a small group of 5 soldiers wearing the standard armor of the Purple Star Army nimbly and carefully shuttled through the trees and rocks. From time to time, they would climb up high and look around, quickly moving forward. Needless to say, from the way they acted, it was obvious that this was an elite scout team. As the vanguard of a war, the importance of scouts to every army was without a doubt. To a certain extent, they were the eyes of the commanders in the army and the source of their confidence in making decisions during wartime. If necessary, they would also become a sharp knife and ruthlessly stab the enemy's logistics and other key points. It was also because of these reasons that if there was a soldier in the army that had the highest average level of tactical knowledge, it would undoubtedly be these scouts who constantly roamed the battlefield and had first-hand information. Of course, it was also because of this that they were puzzled and even doubtful about their own legion's actions. It was as if they had taken some kind of berserk drug and crazily sent their troops into the open battlefield to fight with the barbarians. Originally, the barbarians' terrifying individual combat ability was clear to any rookie who had been on the front line for a few days. Moreover, they didn't even have the upper hand in the battle to defend the city. Now that they suddenly had the whimsical idea of fighting with such an opponent in the wild, what else could it be other than courting death? However, just as the squad leader had reprimanded them, they were only soldiers, and it was their duty to obey the orders of their superiors. Even if they were puzzled and doubtful, they still had to carry out the orders during wartime. In fact, their worries were indeed very necessary. After climbing to the peak of a mountain, before they could check the safety of the surroundings, the squad of scouts suddenly trembled. Damn it, they're here. In the distance, at the end of the wilderness that could be considered flat, there was a black mass of figures in a square formation. It was unknown how many of them there were, and they slowly pressed down with a terrifying might that blotted out the sky. Their faces and banners could not be seen clearly, but the experienced elite scouts could instantly determine whether the other party was an ally or an enemy just by looking at their disposition with their naked eyes. As for the barbarian army in front of them, there was no doubt about it. This was something that could be easily deduced. After all, since the Zechen Legion had chosen to fight in the open, there was no reason for the barbarians not to accept the challenge. The enemy is about 20 li away from us. We don't know how many of them there are, but we estimate that there are at least 30,000 of them. The detailed information will be reported later. Monkey, go back and report to the general. After calmly observing and estimating, the squad leader decisively gave the order. A young scout with a thin figure nodded slightly when he heard the order. Without wasting any time, he simply turned around and ran swiftly in the direction he came from. Hee, did you see that, rookie? This is the ability of a veteran. Pointing at the squad leader, a scout laughed and patted his comrade with a delicate face. He said in a frivolous tone, "You just came here, so there are a lot of things you don't know. Learn well from us." Nodding, the young scout did not seem to be good with words. He looked nervous and cautious, as if he had just entered the battlefield. Hey, why are you like a taciturn gourd? You should at least reply, or at least reply with a single word. Okay. Damn, I asked you to reply with a single word, and you really replied with a single word? Huh. Looking at the gloomy expression on the veteran scout's face, the other scout could not help but laugh out loud. All right, stop talking nonsense. The squad leader waved his hand. Let's go and take a closer look. In order to get the most accurate information, the closer they were to the target, the better. This was a simple principle. Of course, the closer they were to the target, the better. As soon as the squad leader finished speaking, the delicate scout who had been vigilant all this time seemed to have felt something. He suddenly turned his head and looked at the bushes not far away. His expression suddenly changed, and he exclaimed, "There are barbarians, retreat." Blank's army had scouts, but so did the barbarian army. The former was a professional, while the latter was an outstanding hunter. Therefore, it was hard to say who was better between the two. However, one thing was certain. Once the two met, the first to retreat would be brand scouts. It cannot be helped. The barbarians' individual combat ability was too strong. Gullibaloo, seeing that they had been discovered, a few overly burly figures jumped out from behind the bushes like cheetahs. They shouted in unclear barbarian language, as if they were trying to intimidate the scouts. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. With a flick of his wrist, the crossbow bolts flew through the air. Let's go. They were not a match for the barbarians in a one-on-one fight, and now they did not have the advantage in numbers. The squad leader decisively shot out the small repeating crossbow hidden in his sleeve. He turned around and led the few scouts who had reacted to the situation, quickly running away. Roar! The barbarian scouts howled in pain. At such a close distance, they were obvious targets. Naturally, they could not avoid the crossbow arrows. However, they had often dealt with brand scouts. So, they seemed to have known that the enemy would use this trick. When they jumped out from behind the bushes, they covered their faces, throats, and other vital parts with their big hands. This action also saved their lives. The crossbow arrows hit the arms of the two barbarians who were running at the front. They pierced deeply into the arms, and blood splashed everywhere. This injury was not fatal. In fact, it was only a minor injury for the barbarians. Their combat ability did not decrease. Instead, it angered the pursuing barbarians. They roared again and again. Their eyes turned scarlet like wild beasts in the forest. One chased and one fled. In a short moment, both sides had run for several miles. The distance between them did not increase, nor did it decrease. It was still the same distance as before. The squad leader looked back from time to time while running away. He could not help but cry out in his heart. The distance between the two sides was too close. When they discovered each other, they were almost in front of each other. They did not have enough time to decide to separate and hide. Moreover, their bodies were sturdy, and their movements were slow and clumsy. They were almost the label of barbarians. However, they were only ordinary barbarians. The speed of a barbarian scout was obviously not slow. In fact, this squad of scouts should be rejoicing because they did not encounter the professional scouts of the Hidden Snake tribe, the Serpentis Guard, who came and went like the wind. Otherwise, the outcome of the battle would have been decided the moment the two sides met. As for the present situation, it was not good. The speed of the pursuing barbarians was not slower than theirs. Moreover, the barbarians were not able to close the distance between them. However, it was only because the time was not right. They would have to slow down after a while. Then, the barbarians would catch up with them. At that time, it would be time for the entire scout team to be annihilated. Thinking of this, the resolute and decisive squad leader clenched his teeth. He grasped the dagger in his hand and slowed down. Since they could not escape, they could only throw out the bait to give the others time to find a place to hide. After all, it was better for one person to die than for all of them to die here. Just as the squad leader was about to die, the delicate and pretty scout on his left suddenly turned around and stopped. He pulled out the dagger on his waist and crazily attacked the pursuing barbarians. Run. No. Kevin, come back, rookie. Seeing the rookie Kevin, who had just joined the team not long ago and was usually silent, suddenly make such a crazy move, the squad leader was stunned for a moment before his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He roared and immediately turned around to help. However, before he could finish turning around, two scouts suddenly pounced on him and dragged him back. What the hell are you doing? Put me down. I order you. Shut up. Squad leader, do you want this rookie, Kevin, to die in vain? The eyes of the scout who had been mocking his comrade turned red. His expression was ferocious as he roared in a louder voice. The fiercely struggling body suddenly stiffened. It was as if all the strength in his body had been sucked out. The squad leader powerlessly collapsed on his comrade's shoulder. They were all veterans of the battlefield. Naturally, they knew what was the best choice. However, he did not expect that the person who made this decision was not him, but a rookie who had just entered the battlefield, disappearing from the cave. The squad leader watched as Kevin was hit by the barbarian's iron stick. He spat out blood and flew out like a piece of rotten wood. He could not help but close his eyes with a painful expression. F***CK. This scene was undoubtedly very heroic on the battlefield. It was very common, but also very unusual. It was happening everywhere on the front line. If nothing unexpected happened, these survivors would be very sad when they returned. They would apply for the title of a martyr for Kevin and fight for more compensation. Or perhaps, if they were a little more affectionate and righteous, these people would look for Kevin's family after they retired. If the other party's family was in trouble, they wouldn't hesitate to lend a helping hand. However, if these people did not leave immediately, they would discover that the reality was not what they imagined. After spitting out blood and flying out, Kevin crashed into a rock with a loud bang. Cracks appeared on the surface of the rock and debris splashed everywhere. The barbarian who had hit him did not pay attention to him. He roared angrily and continued to chase after him. They were confident in their strength. It was impossible for a thin and weak brand to survive such a heavy blow. They were just angry that this man did not know what was good for him and might have let the other brand escape. But, do you want to leave? A faint voice was heard. The barbarians who were running suddenly stopped. Their faces were full of doubt, not only because of the sudden and strange question, but also because of the extremely authentic barbarian pronunciation. Bull's eyes widened as he turned his head. On the rock, The brand soldier who was bound to die turned over and sat up. He lowered his head and tidied up the almost completely damaged leather armor on his chest. He pulled it a few times and simply took it off. His movements were very natural and casual. He did not look like he was injured at all. He clapped his hands and looked up with a smile. I thought that I would need at least a few days to change my identity. Well, it seems that my luck is not bad. I met you as soon as I arrived. It was still the authentic barbarian language. If one listened carefully, they would find that it had the accent of the imperial city. Who are you? The scene in front of them was very strange. Even the simple-minded barbarians felt that something was wrong. They grabbed the iron rod and asked vigilantly, "It's so obvious. Can't you see?" The handsome scout spread out his hands. "Of course I am a ghost." As soon as the word ghost was spoken, the handsome scout suddenly disappeared from the rock. Before the barbarians could show a shocked expression, a hand stretched out from behind a barbarian and gently touched his neck. Crack, 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 crack. A series of hair-raising and teeth-numbing bone-breaking sounds resounded in the air. Apart from the barbarian who had struck the delicate and pretty scout with his stick, the other barbarian scouts had fallen to the ground in a short span of time. They remained motionless. After squashing these barbarians who had terrifying individual combat strength like chickens, the handsome scout rubbed his chin and observed the barbarian corpses one by one. Then he looked up at the barbarian survivors who were staring with their mouths agape. He couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. Sigh, they're so ugly. Not a single one of them looks like a human. How am I supposed to choose? So conflicted. Needless to say, the so-called new recruit Kevin was Tang in disguise. The space magician did not lie to him. After exhausting 3 horses, Tang spent a day and a night to finally arrive at the front line. Of course, coming here was only the prelude to assassinating the mysterious barbarian commander. For the time being, not to mention where the other party was now, just how to pass through the tightly controlled Brand War Zone was the most important realistic problem. With the start of the war, all the areas near the front line were under military control. Let alone ordinary people. Even the townspeople who originally lived here had been ordered to retreat by the Bulan military, who saw that the situation was not good. Of course, this was not a problem for Tang In. After using a few tricks and relying on his superb concealment and stealth skills, Tang In successfully reached the front line. Then, he disguised himself and took advantage of the chaotic Blank's army that was attacked by the barbarians to sneak into the scattered soldiers who had retreated. In a tense situation, these scattered soldiers would not immediately return to their own army. Instead, they would be incorporated into a new army on the spot without asking for their numbers. Using this loophole, Tang In successfully arrived at the front line of the army. Thinking that this identity was only a temporary one, Tang In used the identity of a scout to sneak into the battlefield. His luck was not bad. Tang In thought that it would take at least a few days to meet the barbarians. He did not expect that when he just arrived, he would run into the high-ranking generals of the Zichan Legion and was immediately sent to the battlefield to inquire about the movements of the barbarian army. Then, naturally, he met these barbarian scouts. After hesitating for a while, Tang In thought that his good comrades would definitely find a way to collect his bones. He sighed and lifted his leg to kick the barbarian corpses down the cliff. Then, he squinted at the surviving barbarians who were retreating and trembling. He showed a smile that he thought was kind. "Ha, don't be nervous. I don't discriminate against you. Come, tell me your name. How many people do you have in your family? How many acres of land do you have per person? How many cows do you have in your field? Tell me everything." A moment later, the surviving barbarian swaggered out with a huge iron rod in his hand. Of course, this was not the original barbarian. It was Tang In who had successfully replicated and disguised himself. The identity of a barbarian was undoubtedly the most suitable one to obtain information and successfully approach the mysterious barbarian commander. Tang In had disguised himself as a barbarian once before, and it was also on the front line of the battlefield. So, he was naturally familiar with this disguise. The difference was that Tang In did not understand the barbarian language at that time. and he almost slipped up. Now, he could be said to be flawless. He walked back and forth a few steps with the barbarian's pace to get the feeling. Then, he said to himself, "My name is Sabah. Damn, why is this name so strange? I come from the brutal bear tribe, 17 years old this year. Damn, my development is too good. Did I take hormones? I have an old mother and a woman at home. I'm the fifth child. I have an elder sister, 3 elder brothers, 2 younger brothers, and 3 younger sisters. Awesome. I'm so good at giving birth. Don't they know that giving birth to fewer children will lead to a happy life?" Just when Tang In was concentrating on familiarizing himself with all the basic information of this body, suddenly he said, "They're in front of us. Quick, quick, quick. Don't let those bastards escape. I want to twist their heads off with my own hands to avenge Kevin." Tang In was stunned. He turned his head and saw a large group of about 100 brand soldiers fiercely rushing towards him. The leaders were his former comrades. They were the scout team that had just escaped. Sure enough, they are here. Brothers, chop them to pieces. That's not right. Aren't there a few more? Wait, where are Kevin's bones? Tang In cursed in his heart when the two sides met. These 100 brand soldiers were obviously not from the scout team. Obviously, these were his former comrades who had accidentally bumped into them on their way back. Then, they were invited to avenge him. Damn it. Just now, he was being chased by the barbarians. Now, he was being chased by the brand soldiers. How did he end up in such an awkward situation? Without saying anything, he turned around and ran while dragging his iron rod. Behind him, the squad leader's sorrowful cry could be heard. "You beast! You didn't even let go of the corpse. How did you eat it? Kill him! Kill him! Damn it!" Tang In staggered when he heard this. The barbarian who had just adjusted his pace almost made a mistake and fell to the ground. Don't listen to what others say, okay? I have stayed in the northern wilderness. How could I not know that the barbarians like to eat people? Rumors kill people. Even if Tang In changed his running posture, the brand soldiers would not be able to catch up with his speed. He quickly ran down to the foot of the mountain and increased the distance between the two sides. As soon as he raised his head, Tang In, who was about to run back to his original army, was stunned. In the boundless wilderness, the barbarian army and the Zichan army that had just appeared were separated by a few miles. They were like two wild beasts that did not like each other. There was no need to test each other as they slowly approached each other. A battle was about to break out. After regaining his senses, Tang In curled his lips. "I won't thank you, old fox." It was true that Tang In did not understand military strategy, but that did not mean that he was an idiot. The Zichan Legion's counterattack strategy was obviously abnormal. The difference in strength between the two sides was not something that Zichan could not see. Therefore, the current situation could only be caused by the Zichan Legion receiving an irresistible order from their superiors. That was why they made such a stupid move. As the person involved, Tang In only needed to think for a moment before he understood who was behind this: Wu Ding. As for the other party's purpose, it was nothing more than to make the situation chaotic so that he could take advantage of the situation. They were willing to pay a huge price. Chapter 984. Hurried, galloping horses, earth-shattering roars, clashing weapons, and long screams mixed with excitement and mournful cries in just a short moment. After Tang In had bypassed the main battlefield, the boundless wilderness, the surrounding mountains, forests, and even every valley had become a meat grinder on the battlefield. In fact, it was not only here. On both sides of the Zichan war zone, the Tsangyin war zone and the Thunder war zone were also having the same bloody battle. This was a battle that did not make sense. The brand's frontline legion had received orders from their superiors, and they had no choice but to do so. The barbarians were also in a hurry to meet the enemy. Both sides were not well prepared. In this special situation, the use of tricks and strategies was almost negligible. The only thing that could decide the direction of the battle was the command of the officers and generals, as well as the combat quality of the soldiers. Especially the latter, it was the most important thing. Therefore, the barbarians, who had terrifying individual strength, undoubtedly had a great advantage. They were never afraid of close combat. What they were afraid of were the towns with thick stone walls and the various powerful alchemy weapons of the brand. But now, in this open battlefield, the brand's advantage in this aspect was undoubtedly greatly reduced. There were no checkpoints, fences, moats, and other military facilities here. Even the annoying alchemy weapons were much less. At least, they did not see the hammer of thunder that caused them to suffer heavy casualties every time, or the cold metal cannons that were raised high, to their heart's content. Every barbarian warrior was extremely excited. They kept waving the huge weapons in their hands, creating a whistling sound. A few regular brand soldiers could not even get close to them. Of course, the battle had just begun. Naturally, the outcome would not be decided so easily. For example, even though the barbarians had a slight advantage in terms of numbers, it was undoubtedly unrealistic to want to take down so many elite Zechen soldiers in one go. However, this had nothing to do with Tang, who had bypassed the main battlefield. This world was not the modern world. The scouts here were not the modern world. The scouts here were not the modern world scouts who had the ability to launch small-scale assaults. Generally speaking, in this more primitive cold weapon battlefield, the scouts did not need to directly participate in the battle. Of course, if all the soldiers were killed, it would be a different story. At that time, perhaps even the chef in charge of logistics would have to fight with his kitchen knife. The rear of the barbarians was more chaotic. There were shadows of people mixed with earth-shattering roars from time to time. This made Tang, who was here for the first time, feel confused. After strolling around, not only did he not find his current identity's camp, he did not even find a place that looked like a command system. Of course, Tang did not know that the barbarian army did not have a fixed command center. Unlike Bran, who was a general of an army, or even a division commander, who had a fixed command post during battle, the barbarian general was directly in the middle of the army. The so-called command post consisted of the barbarian general himself and a few officers beside him. When they saw that the battle was not going well, they would immediately scold the barbarian general and a few officers beside him. Then, they would randomly pick an officer beside them, or perhaps an officer would recommend himself, and immediately lead the barbarian general to support the barbarian general. Straightforward, simple, and violent. Of course, this did not mean that the barbarians did not have a command center. The reason why the commanders and officers commanded so simply was in fact because the warriors under them were generally simple-minded. Only by using this kind of primitive command could they better control the army under them. However, the commanders of a higher rank did not need to do this because they directly gave orders to the commanders with reasonable intelligence. They did not need to worry that their orders would be misinterpreted. Therefore, there was a command center. In simple terms, the barbarian army had a fixed command center. Generally speaking, it was a big boss. Tang, who was not clear about this point, was very depressed. He observed the simple and crude camp from front to back, but still could not find the command center of the barbarian army. Although he did not expect to meet the mysterious commander as soon as he arrived, it was a little awkward that he could not even find a small command center. Soon, Tang realized that something must have gone wrong. Therefore, he did not insist on looking for the non-existent command center. Instead, he walked towards his own army that he had found along the way. The moment he entered the simple and crude camp, he realized that the mountain was actually a place where the wounded and provisions were placed. "You're back, Brother Sabah." A barbarian with a body as strong as a bear walked towards him. When he saw Tang, he grinned and nodded to greet him. Then, he looked back in confusion. Where are Wu Lihan and the others? Didn't you go out together? Wu Lihan? Oh, it must be the other barbarian scouts. Don't mention it. It's so unlucky. Tang shook his head sadly and waved his bloody arm. When I came back, I met a large group of brand soldiers. In the end, I was the only one who made it out alive. Sigh, what a pity. I hope they can return to the embrace of the great god of the wilderness. With his hand on his left chest, the barbarian, as strong as a bear, raised his head and recited a eulogy to the sky. Then he shook his head. There was not much sadness on his face. It was not that he was cold-blooded. The barbarians of the northern wilderness did not have a strong view of death, especially when dying on the battlefield. It was a glorious thing to them. He patted Tang's shoulder. "Don't be sad, Brother Sabah. We will avenge them." "Okay." Tang, who realized that he seemed to have overacted, retracted his sorrowful expression and nodded his head in agreement. "Why don't we go and kill a few of them to vent our anger?" The strong barbarian's mouth curved into a cruel smile. "Anyway, there's nothing to do here. With our skills, as long as we are careful, killing a few brand bastards will be easy." This was true. The barbarians who could enter the scout team were definitely not ordinary people. Based on speed alone, as long as they were not surrounded by the brand soldiers, they could quickly kill a few of them and escape. The brand soldiers would not be able to do anything to them. Forget it, you go. I'll go and report the information that I've found." "Report my ass. We've already started fighting. Why would they need our information?" After a pause, the strong barbarian seemed to have realized something. He looked at Tang in confusion. "Strange, Sabah, the way you speak. Why does it sound a little different? It seems to have the accent of the imperial city. It's quite authentic. Cough, cough. What the F***CK? How the F***CK could he tell?" Tang always felt that the barbarian's speech was like having a walnut in their mouth. It was unclear. It was good enough that he could understand what they were saying. He did not think that there was a distinction between the accent of the imperial city and the accent of other places. He coughed a few times and lowered his voice. "What accent of the imperial city? I'm not from the imperial city. My throat has been uncomfortable for the past few days. Maybe it's because of this." "Oh." The burly barbarian nodded his head in understanding. He did not suspect Twain's identity. It was impossible for him to doubt Rinpochian. After all, Rinpochian was standing in front of him. He waved his hand and left. "That's it then. I'll go to the battlefield and see if I can get some military merits." "All right, if the leader asks, help me hide it." "No problem." Tang had some information about the barbarians' military merits. As long as it was an army, it was necessary to distinguish between rewards and punishments. The barbarians were also the same. Usually, they would cut off the left ear of a brand soldier on the battlefield. Of course, this was referring to the special forces. Ordinary barbarian soldiers did not have time to cut off their ears when they were charging in a battle. Usually, after winning a battle, the military merits would be collectively counted on the head of the entire team. Although this was a little biased, it was better to calculate it. It could also cultivate the ability of the team to cooperate in battle. On the other hand, scouts who usually operated alone or in small groups of a few people were considered special forces. They had plenty of time to cut off the enemy's ear and bring it back to add to the military merit book. Of course, at this time, the scouts were not allowed to go out and earn military merits. After all, the higher-ups might need them. However, they were not strict in this aspect. Moreover, under normal circumstances, the barbarians rarely needed them in official battles. Therefore, as long as they covered it up, there would not be any problems. The higher-ups would turn a blind eye to this kind of private activity. After bidding farewell to the sturdy barbarian who wanted to earn military merits, Tang did not immediately report to the higher-ups. Of course, he did not even know what the higher-ups looked like or where they were. After taking a stroll in the valley and silently observing for a while, Tang began to consciously contact the targets he had chosen. The wounded soldiers, the logisticians, the guards, and so on. It seemed that he was casually chatting with them, but in fact, he was enriching the image of his disguised identity. At the same time, he was also indirectly asking for information. This was very easy for Tang. With his skills in getting information, coupled with the simple-minded barbarians, he was always successful. However, there was still no progress regarding the mysterious barbarian commander. Perhaps it was because their ranks were too low. The barbarians here only knew that the mysterious commander seemed to value the scouts. However, they did not get any useful information. After an hour, Tang found the person he was reporting to. He was the higher-up in charge of the loose scout team. His name was Bagan. He was a middle-aged barbarian with abnormally exuberant body hair. He looked like a male lion. Oh, right. The customary address here was Chief. Chief, I'm back. The middle-aged barbarian, called Bagan, was packing an envelope. When he heard the voice, he turned his head and saw that it was Tang In. He looked unhappy and said, Sabah, why did you come back so slowly? Hey, you're injured? It's nothing, Chief. It's just a small injury. Tang In waved his arm casually and shook his head. Unfortunately, Wu Lihan and the others were not so lucky. When we came back, we were surrounded by a large group of brand soldiers. I was the only one who made it back. Sai, how could you be so careless? Compared to the unconcerned, sturdy barbarian, Bagan's expression was much more sorrowful. Perhaps he felt sorry for the fate of his subordinates. Then, he shook his lion head and said, Forget it. It's good that you came back. Chief, I found some information about the Blank's army. What do you think? Let's not talk about this for now. Call Timur in for me. The battle had already begun. As expected, Bagan did not care about the outdated and useless information from Tang In. He waved his hand and asked Tang In to go out and call someone in for him. Timur, one of the team leaders of this barbarian scout team. Tang In's heart skipped a beat when he heard that. He discreetly glanced at the tightly bound envelope in Bagan's hands and asked tentatively, Boss, are you here to deliver information? Why don't you count me in? You? Bagan frowned unhappily and said rudely, This is not something you should interfere in. Call Timur. TSK. Tang In could not help but feel a little regretful. This was a rare opportunity. From what he had heard earlier, the mysterious commander seemed to place great importance on the role of scouts. To put it bluntly, he placed great importance on intelligence gathering. And if he guessed correctly, the thick envelope in Bagan's hand must be information about the Blank's army in this battle. It was very likely to be delivered to the mysterious commander. It was a good idea to follow the clues. Unfortunately, Bagan did not seem to trust him enough. Without forcing it, Tang In left and found the team leader Timur to pass on a message. Then, Tang In strolled to the wounded barracks. With the excuse of asking for a clean cloth to wrap his injured arm, he stayed there and chatted with the wounded barbarians. It had to be said that most of the barbarians were very honest. They did not have any ulterior motives. Basically, they would answer all the questions. This made Tang In feel that the collection of information was not challenging at all. As they chatted, suddenly, the curtain of the wounded barracks was lifted by a big hairy hand. A powerful barbarian walked in. His eyes were like lightning as he looked around. He seemed to be suppressing his anger. Tang In looked at him casually and was stunned. He knew this person. It was Timur, who was called by Bagan not long ago. It seemed that he did not find the person he wanted to see. The anger on Timur's face became more obvious. He turned his head and happened to meet Tang In's eyes. He was also stunned. He paused and hesitated for a moment. Then he walked over. Timur, team leader. Tang In stood up and bowed with his hand on his chest. In, Sabah, right? Timur nodded slightly and glanced at Tang In's arm that was wrapped in cloth. He asked, How is your injury? It's just a small injury. It's not a big deal. Tang In did not know the purpose of the other party's visit. He could only answer honestly. That's good. How about going on a mission with me? Most of the barbarians were straightforward. Timur was no exception. He said straightforwardly, I don't know where the bastards of my team went. I'm short of manpower. Since you're fine, then help me. He did not say it clearly. However, whether it was Timur or Tang In, both of them knew that the missing scouts in the team had gone out to earn military merits. That was why Timur was so embarrassed that he couldn't find his team members after completing the mission. On the other hand, Timur did not want to expose this matter. Not only would his team members not be able to earn military merits, but they would also be punished when they returned. After thinking about it, he could only ask Tang In to make up the number of people. Tang In was overjoyed when he heard this. He was the one who went to find Timur just now. Naturally, he knew what the mission was. He could not help but secretly sigh. He had searched high and low only to find it by chance. Of course, on the surface, he still hesitated and scratched his head. I'm fine, But if the leader asks, Timur waved his hand indifferently. It's okay. I'll just go and say hello. Then there's no problem. I'm willing to go on this mission with the leader of the Timur team. Good, you're very kind. Thank you. Timur was also overjoyed when he heard this. He patted Tang's shoulder and laughed. Haha, don't worry. I won't let you go for nothing. I guarantee that you'll earn a lot of military merits on this trip. He saluted excitedly. Thank you for your help, leader of the Timur team. TSK, who said that the barbarians did not know the ways of the world. They were quite good at it. After Timur went to say hello to Begin, the intelligence team officially set off. There were a total of 5 people. Captain Timur, Tang In, 2 remaining members of the Timur team, and a scout who, like Tang Un, was temporarily recruited from another team. When they came out of the call, they heard the faint sounds of killing coming from afar. They knew that the battle in the wilderness was not over yet. Of course, as long as Brandside did not take the initiative to retreat, this battle would not end so quickly. It could only be that as time went on, the area of the battlefield would continue to expand. The team did not rush to the rear as Tang and had expected. Instead, they moved along the valley and the dense forest, groping their way to the right. Upon seeing this, Tang leaned over and pretended to be curious. Captain, where are we going? Perhaps because he felt that he owed Tang a favor, Timur did not hide it and replied readily. We're going to Hugula's Southern Guardian General. Upon hearing this, Tang could not help but be secretly disappointed. Although the Southern Guardian General sounded like a big boss, it was obviously not the mysterious barbarian commander. His expression did not change, and he pretended to be vigilant and observe the surroundings. He asked again, Is it far? Is it safe? It's not far. We should be able to reach it in the evening. But it's hard to say whether it's safe or not. Timur did not deceive him and said cautiously, I've been there several times before. Except for one time when I met the defeated Brand soldiers, I didn't encounter any danger. But this time it's different. I heard that the area within 100 miles is in complete chaos. We may meet a lot of Brand soldiers. Tang Yin nodded thoughtfully. He did not ask any more questions and hurried on with the journey. Timur's estimation was right. The Brand soldiers and the barbarians in the northern wilderness within 100 miles were completely entangled, which greatly increased the danger of their journey. Not long after they set off, they saw several Brand troops. Sometimes they were chased by the barbarians, and sometimes they were the ones chasing the barbarians. It was a mess and completely disorderly. Walking in it was like dancing on the edge of a knife. It was thrilling and exciting. If they were not careful, they would be doomed eternally. But their luck seemed to be good. No matter which direction the Brand troops came from, they were always discovered in time, or they simply avoided them by accident. Only when they walked past them did they realize that there was a Brand troop not far behind them. This godlike situation was naturally caused by Tang Un's secret tricks. With his stealth skills and precise control of a small area, even Tiu's army could not catch him, let alone this small situation. But because he was very careful, and sometimes he even led Timur and others to discover him first, no one realized that something was wrong. They just thought that their luck was really good today. From time to time, they would put their hands on their chests and thank the gods for their blessings. Chapter 985. After all, a person's military strength was limited, especially on the battlefield. The so-called thousands of enemies or tens of thousands of enemies was just a saying. Let's take an example that many people were talking about. Between the sword god, Wu Ding, and the war god, Zi, who was more powerful? Zi wasn't weak in terms of individual strength, but he certainly wasn't a match for Wu Ding. However, the result would have been hard to predict if the two of them had clashed. Well, it should have been the principle of striking first to gain the upper hand. Zi wouldn't have been able to escape if Wu Ding had attacked first, even though he was surrounded by thousands of soldiers. And Wu Ding would have taken his head. However, Zi wouldn't have been able to escape the fate of exhaustion if he had taken precautions and attacked first. Moreover, He would have carried heavy weapons on the battlefield and led his army to surround Wu Ding's small residence. Of course, this was only a guess. It would have been hard to say who would have won if that had happened. It could have been said that both sides would have had the opportunity to kill each other. However, it could have been speculated that Tang Un's strength wasn't as good as Wu Ding's. So, he would have had a pitiful success rate in assassinating the mysterious barbarian commander. Tang Un had been very careful and patient ever since he had entered the battlefield, even though he was extremely worried about the situation on Josiah's side. First, he had quietly approached the front line. Then, he had disguised himself as a scout for the brand. Now, he had become a scout for the barbarians. He had advanced his plan step by step in an orderly manner. It didn't matter which field he was in, but the threat level would have undoubtedly increased if the side that already had a big advantage had lowered their status and planned slowly. Tang Un wouldn't have dared to say anything at the moment, but he could have avoided this chaotic situation with ease soon. Tang Un had been escorting them all the way. The intelligence team had passed through the chaotic battlefield unscathed and had found their destination before the expected evening had arrived. This was the first time that Tang Un had seen a command center in the barbarian army. Great savage God above. We actually made it here. Taimu went forward to negotiate with the barbarian guard, while Twain and the rest waited outside. One of the scouts scratched his head as he looked at the dozens of kilometers they had safely covered, his face filled with disbelief. Yes, when I was passing through that dense forest, I saw a large group of brand soldiers walking past me. I thought I was going to die this time. If I had known that my luck would be so good today, I would have definitely pulled a few people to gamble and earn some extra money. What a pity. Listening to the surprised exclamations of several people, Tang Un smiled foolishly and kept echoing them. He also looked like he could not believe it. His acting was very good. Immediately, after Timur showed his pass token and other tokens to verify his identity, the negotiation was successful. Tang Un and the others stepped into the military camp smoothly. The barbarians were undisciplined by nature, but they weren't allowed to wander around in such an important military area. After a brief observation, they were led by a barbarian to a tent in the right corner of the military camp. Well, if I'm not mistaken, this tent should be a product of the brand. Even the Zechen Legion's logo was still on the side. It was obviously a spoil of war, but its current function was to support the intelligence organization of the barbarian army. After Timur handed over the thick letter, the mission of this intelligence team was considered complete. But they didn't leave immediately. Instead, they stayed in the first tent and chatted in a low voice. Tang Un found it strange. So, he went over and asked, Timur team leader, shouldn't we leave immediately after the mission is completed? Timur was stunned when he heard this. Then, he patted his head and suddenly realized, oh, I'm sorry. I forgot that, Brother Sabah. This is your first mission. Well, we still have to wait for a while. Let's wait for the intelligence from the other armies to arrive. Then, we can leave if there are no problems. If there are, we need to ask some questions to verify. Tang Un nodded to show that he understood. Another scout, who was also not part of the Timur team, asked, how long do we have to wait? It's hard to say. After hesitating for a while, Timur smiled proudly. In the past, most of us came later. We didn't have to wait for a long time. We just asked a few questions and left. But this time, TSK, we should be the first to arrive. Since they were the first to arrive, they naturally had to wait for the other scouts. We're the first, a barbarian scout exclaimed. He was overjoyed when he heard this. Captain, are we really the first to arrive? Damn, it's not easy. I didn't expect to be the first to arrive. This feels so good. That's right. In the past, those weird guys always looked down on us. This time, I want to see what kind of face they have. The military camp of the Southern City Army was undoubtedly the command center of the front line. As a result, there were many scouts gathering information here. This time, they were able to stand out from their peers. Although there was an element of luck involved, they had indeed snatched the title of number one. This undoubtedly made Taimu, and the others very excited. It was as if they had taken turns to sit on the throne and were overjoyed that they had arrived at their home today. Tang En, of course, didn't care about this. On the surface, he looked excited. It had to be said that the contempt hidden in his words really made him feel uncomfortable. Ahem. After a light cough, Timur stood up and returned the greeting. He raised his hand and pointed to the back of the tent. His bull-like eyes suddenly lit up. It's a misunderstanding. The sirs are inside. After a pause, he looked at the stunned Serpentis guard and grinned. By the way, let me introduce myself. I'm Timur, the leader of the scout team of the West Army. One after another, scouts from various places arrived. There were ordinary barbarians and elite scouts like the Serpentis Guard. When they entered the tent, they were more or less in a sorry state. Their injuries were light, and the number of people was uneven. Some of them were even hurriedly carried out and sent to the treatment area for injured soldiers after they handed over the information. The strange thing was that no matter how many people entered the tent, the atmosphere was not lively. It was strangely dull. The source of this situation could be easily seen by even the slow-witted ordinary barbarians. Therefore, the number of people who secretly glanced inside the tent gradually increased. On the left side of the tent, Tang En and the others were sitting upright. Across the aisle, on the right side of the tent, were the three Serpentis guards with gloomy temperaments and ugly expressions. There wasn't much of a conflict. It was just a matter of first come, first served. Of course, Timur did have the intention to show off a little, but that was it. He didn't dare to say anything that would provoke them and cause a conflict. This could be easily seen from his calm expression and the clenching and unclenching fists behind his back. The Serpentis guards weren't ordinary people. Although they were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, Timur's side would definitely die if Tang and didn't help them. The result wouldn't change even if they had twice the number of people. Of course, this wasn't an ordinary place either. Therefore, even though the three Serpentis guards were unhappy, they didn't dare to take the initiative to attack. Moreover, they weren't in the right. They were the ones who misunderstood the situation. Not only did the other party point out the correct point, but he also politely introduced himself. Well, this self-introduction was a little meaningful, but it was a normal conversation after all. Therefore, they could only swallow this loss. In the end, both sides sat facing each other and stared at each other. It was as if they were playing a game of killing each other with their eyes. Another 2 hours passed. It was already evening and dusk was falling. There were about 100 scouts gathered in the tent. The curtain hadn't been lifted for a while. Obviously, almost everyone who should be here had arrived. Those who weren't here wouldn't be able to make it. The deadlock was quickly broken. An anxious barbarian messenger hurried into the tent. He passed through the crowd and entered the tent. It seemed that he was urgently reporting something to the officer. Although there was a lot of movement in the tent, Tang En, who had extraordinary hearing, was still able to catch a few words from inside. Didn't come back. We've looked everywhere. Maybe he's dead. Delivering information. What should we do? Tang En's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. His body, which was close to the inner part of the tent, moved inwards. He opened his mouth and yawned. He leaned against the tent and closed his eyes as if he was taking a nap. His ears, which were gently pressed against the oilcloth, were trembling slightly. After a while, the barbarian messenger left in a hurry. Tang En opened his eyes. He thought for a while and reached out his hand to touch Timur's back. Captain, I'm going to relieve myself. Relieve yourself? Relieve yourself? Squat in the latrine. Oh, go. Come back quickly. Speechless, Tang En got up and stretched. He stepped out from behind Timur and walked up the aisle. Sensing something, he turned his head and saw the gloomy gazes of the three Serpentis guards. He was stunned for a moment. Then, he cracked a smile and nodded intimately. Startled, the three Dark Snake Guard were clearly caught off guard by this rather sincere smile. They paused for a moment before shifting their gazes away in disdain. TSK, so rude. Tang En smacked his lips and stepped out of the tent. He met the guard's puzzled gaze and approached him. Hey, buddy, where's the latrine? Latrine? What do you need that for? The barbarian guard pointed at the gully in the distance. Just find a place to relieve yourself. Thank you. So, the primitive society is still the best. Tang glanced at the barbarian messenger who had not gone far. He walked in the opposite direction, bypassed the tent, and disappeared from the sight of the guards behind him. A moment later, Tang lifted the curtain and walked into the tent again with a comfortable look on his face. Slightly stunned, the scouts who were sitting on the ground all stood up and formed a circle. He could not see what was happening inside. However, after listening to the questions and answers, Tang instantly understood what was going on. The barbarian messenger inside must have come out to verify the differences in the information and was asking the scouts from all over the place. In other words, it was time to leave. However, Tang gently shook his head. He had a mysterious smile on his face. He found Timur and the others and stood behind them. Tang obviously came late. The barbarian messenger had asked almost everything. He could only roughly tell that the situation here was not bad. This also meant that Bran's side was in a passive situation. Of course, this was normal. He believed that as time passed, the situation of Bran's battle would become more and more unfavorable. Well, it's not early anymore. Everyone should take advantage of the night to return, sir. Just as the barbarian intelligence officer was about to wave his hand to dismiss the scouts, the curtain was lifted again. The barbarian messenger, who had left a moment ago, rushed in and squeezed through the surrounding scouts. He came to the side of the barbarian intelligence officer and whispered a few words into his ear. The intelligence officer immediately frowned. His expression was gloomy and angry. A bunch of damn bastards. Hurry up and send someone to bring them back. Sir, we have searched everywhere. They are indeed not in the camp. Trash. Yes. He chuckled silently. The scouts present did not know what had happened, but Tang was well aware. After these local scouts had delivered the information of the battle, there was nothing left for them to do. The scouts here would pass the information to their superiors. However, when the barbarian messenger entered the tent for the first time, Tang heard that the person they were supposed to pass on the information to was the captain of the scout team. He had not appeared for a long time, and it seemed that he had died on the battlefield. Thus, the messenger had no choice but to choose a new candidate. But when Tang heard this, he knew that his chance had come. He went out and followed the messenger for a stroll. First, he used a small trick to delay the messenger. Then, he found the place where the scouts were located. He flashed in and out and directly wiped out the captain of the scouts selected by the barbarian intelligence officer, as well as a few other scouts who seemed to be the leaders. When a messenger came later to announce the order, he could not find a suitable candidate. Thus, the next thing was simple. The importance of information was timeliness. There could not be any delay. Moreover, the scout team had disappeared. So, what should the messenger do? The messenger, who wanted to make up for his mistake, looked at the confused faces of the surrounding scouts. His eyes suddenly lit up. He went closer and whispered a few words. The barbarian intelligence officer's complexion relaxed as he heard these words. He obviously felt that this idea was reliable, but he was still hesitant. He pondered for a moment. Then he finally said, "Everyone, you were able to successfully deliver the information here in the chaotic environment. So, you're naturally capable warriors. Well, there is still a task here. We need some manpower. Who among you thinks you can do it?" This was the selection of generals. It was also the selection of generals among the dwarves. There was no other way. They had to deliver the information. Since their own men were not good enough, they could only ask for external help. However, although the messenger was asking who could do it, his eyes were fixed on the few Serpentis guard present. Obviously, in his eyes, if there was a suitable candidate, it would be among these people. The reason why he did not give the order directly was that he still wanted to find a captain. However, because he was not familiar with these scouts, he wanted to hear their opinions. Of course, it would be best if that person could convince the crowd and be directly elected. As soon as the messenger finished speaking, a low, buzzing sound was heard. All the scouts were very excited and eager to try. As a scout, even if they weren't very smart, their brains would definitely work faster than the average barbarian. Although the barbarian commander didn't say it clearly, the scouts instantly realized that this was a great opportunity that they couldn't miss. Among them, the 3 Serpentis guard who arrived after Tang in, and the others looked at each other and smiled. They stepped forward confidently and said, "Sir," the surrounding scouts were anxious when they saw that they were 1 step ahead of them. However, when they saw the 3 Serpentis guards step forward, they hesitated and seemed to be afraid. At this moment, a muffled voice came from the crowd. "Isn't it simple? If you think you can do it, then go and fight. Whoever wins will go." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.